Hi guys! Tonight we begin in a place where winter does not arrive politely. It doesn't knock. It doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up one morning in the air you breathe, in the way your fingers stiffen, in the way sound carries farther and sharper across frozen ground. You are standing still, and already you feel it cold pressing inward. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just relentless, the kind of cold that doesn't chase you. It waits for you to make a mistake. You probably won't survive this if you think of shelter as something tall, proud, or visible from far away. Because here, survival starts by disappearing. Before we go any further, before you settle too deeply into the warmth you hopefully have right now, take a moment to notice where you are. What time is it for you? Is it late evening? Or already slipping into morning? Drop your location and local time in the comments when you can. And yes, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights. And stay right where you are. The cold you're feeling now is not theoretical. For many Native American communities living across the northern plains, the Great Basin, and parts of the Southwest at elevation, winter was not a season, it was an environment. Temperatures dropped fast. Winds scoured open land. Snow didn't just fall, it erased landmarks. And wood, the thing modern minds immediately jump to for building, was often scarce, fragile, or better saved for fire rather than walls. So you stand there, wrapped in whatever layers you have, and you realize something important. Wind is the enemy, not snow, not even cold. Exactly. Wind steals heat faster than hunger steals strength. And the land itself offers a solution so obvious it's easy to overlook. The ground does not move. You kneel, maybe without even thinking about it, and press your palm into the soil. Even in winter, beneath the frozen crust, the earth holds a steady temperature. Historians widely agree that underground or semi-subterranean shelters, often called earth lodges or pit houses, were among the most effective cold-weather dwellings ever devised without modern insulation. Not because they were complex, because they worked with physics instead of against it. You don't fight winter by standing taller than it. You sink below it. As the wind howls above, the earth absorbs sound. You notice this first. The moment you step down into a shallow depression, even before walls are finished, the noise softens. It's like someone turned the volume knob halfway down on the world. Snow still falls. Wind still moves. But it no longer has direct access to your body. Some archaeologists point out that this principle using Earth as thermal mass predates agriculture itself in North America. Others still argue whether these structures emerged independently across regions or spread through shared knowledge between tribes. Either way, the result is the same. You feel calmer the moment you go lower. The entrance is never wide. That's deliberate. A large opening invites cold air to spill inside, heavy and fast, pushing warmth upward and out. Instead, the entry stays narrow, sometimes angled, sometimes lowered just enough that you have to duck. It's inconvenient, slightly uncomfortable, and that discomfort is doing you a favor. There's a quiet rule here if it's easy to enter. It's probably cold inside. You step down further. The floor is packed earth, sometimes layered with reeds, sometimes animal hides, sometimes just smoothed by years of careful use. Your feet feel the difference immediately. Not warm, let's not exaggerate, but stable. The cold no longer bites upward. It settles. Fire will come later. Fire is precious. Fire is managed. For now, it's the shape of the space that matters. You notice the ceiling isn't high. No soaring beams. No wasted volume. Heat rises. And anything above your head that doesn't need to be there is space you'll have to warm with your own body. This isn't minimalism. It's restraint. A design choice refined over generations. There's a mainstream historical consensus that many plains tribes, including the Mandan and Hidatsa, built earth lodges capable of housing extended families through long winters. But here's a lesser-known detail that surprises people. These homes weren't meant to feel temporary or desperate. Some lasted decades. Children grew up inside them. Elders died inside them. Life didn't pause underground. It continued. And still, historians still debate whether the spiritual symbolism of living within the earth came before or after the practical benefits. Did people associate the ground with protection because it saved them, or did they build this way because they already believed the earth was alive? Maternal. In closing, you sit down now, or maybe crouch. Your breath slows. Not because you're safe yet, but because the environment has changed. Sound is muted. Light is controlled. Above you. Winter rages. Below. There is intention. The smell is subtle. Dry soil. Smoke residue from past fires. The faint, lingering presence of animals that once provided warmth. Clothing and flooring. Nothing is wasted here. Nothing is decorative for its own sake. One fringe detail sometimes overlooked in textbooks is how some communities used layered entrances or partial windbreak tunnels to further trap warmer air inside. Not all tribes did this. Not all winters required it. But when conditions worsened, adaptations appeared not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, like adding one more layer when the cold deepens. You notice something else now. The dark isn't frightening. It's controlled. Openings are small. Yes, but placed carefully, often facing away from prevailing winds. Sometimes angled toward the low winter sun, light enters briefly, predictably. It doesn't linger. It doesn't need to. This isn't a place meant to be bright. It's a place meant to hold you. As you settle deeper into this space, your shoulders drop without you telling them to. Your body understands before your mind does. Underground, winter loses its teeth. Not completely, but enough. And that's the goal. Not comfort. Survival with dignity. Above you, the world remains hostile. Below, you are learning how people endured, not by conquering nature, but by listening to it long enough to stop fighting. And you stay there, breathing slowly, already feeling the shape of this shelter shaping you in return. You remain close to the ground, and the longer you stay there, the clearer it becomes that the earth is not passive. It is working. Even now, as winter hardens the surface above, the soil around you holds a steadiness that feels almost deliberate. You press your palm down again. Slower this time. The cold does not rush upward. It lingers. Muted. Absorbed. This is not coincidence. This is why you are here. You begin to understand that the earth itself is the first shelter. Everything else is secondary. Long before walls are shaped or roofs are laid, the decision to dig is already a decision to cooperate. Wind cannot claw its way through soil. Snow cannot pile up inside it. Even sound loses strength as it travels through packed earth. What feels like hiding is actually strategy. A widely accepted historical fact is that underground or semi-underground homes maintain a far more stable internal temperature than surface dwellings. In winter, the ground resists rapid heat loss. In summer, it resists overheating. This balance is not perfect, but it is predictable, and predictability, in harsh climates, is more valuable than comfort. You notice how still it feels down here. Above ground, winter is noisy. Trees creak. Ice snaps. Wind screams across open land. But below, everything slows. The earth presses gently inward. Not threatening. Just present. It feels like being wrapped rather than buried. Some researchers have pointed out a curious detail. Many Native American underground shelters were dug just deep enough to benefit from insulation, but not so deep that moisture became a constant threat. Too shallow and the cold seeps in. Too deep and water collects. The balance matters. And balance, you realize, is learned through failure as much as success. Historians still argue whether this knowledge developed independently across regions or whether it spread gradually as groups migrated and shared techniques. There is no single origin story. Instead, there are many small adjustments made over generations, passed down without diagrams, without measurements, without written instructions, just memory, observation, and correction. You shift your weight, and the ground feels firm beneath you. Floors were often packed carefully, sometimes mixed with clay, sometimes layered with grasses or hides. This was not about luxury. It was about reducing dampness and making long nights tolerable. Cold from below is slow, but it is persistent. The earth blocks wind, but it does not forgive carelessness. There is a quiet discipline to this kind of living. You do not dig wherever you feel like it. You watch the land. You notice where snow lingers longest, where meltwater runs in spring, where animals burrow and where they avoid. The earth teaches you where it can be trusted. A lesser-known and slightly quirky detail is that in some regions, builders paid close attention to the smell of soil when digging. Earth that held too much moisture or decay was avoided. This was not superstition. It was sensory science. Smell warned of rot, standing water, or unstable ground, long before collapse became visible. You breathe in now. Slowly. The air smells different here. Earthy. Dry. Faintly smoky. Not stale. Just settled. Smoke stains on the ceiling tell you that fire has lived here before. That matters. Smoke behaves differently underground. It rises. Spreads. And if given no exit, it lingers dangerously. That is why openings matter. But that comes later. For now, it is the earth doing most of the work. You realize something else. Going underground is not a sign of fear. It is a sign of confidence. Confidence that the land will not betray you if you respect its limits. Confidence that winter does not need to be defeated, only endured wisely. There is a modern tendency to imagine underground living as claustrophobic or desperate. But here, it feels deliberate. The ceiling is low. Yes, but not oppressive. The space is shaped for bodies, not for standing tall. You sit. You lie down. You move slowly. Everything encourages stillness. That stillness conserves heat. One mainstream archaeological finding shows that many of these shelters were reinforced with wooden frames, stone rings, or packed sod to prevent collapse. But the earth itself carried much of the weight. It was not just cover. It was structure. Some scholars debate whether the symbolic idea of returning to the earth during winter influenced these designs. Was winter seen as a time of retreat into the body of the land, mirroring seeds lying dormant, or was symbolism added later? Layered onto practical choices, the truth likely shifts from tribe to tribe, from century to century. You let that question drift. You do not need the answer tonight. What you need is the feeling you have now, the sense that the world above can rage all it wants, and it will not reach you easily here. Snow can pile, wind can howl, ice can crack trees in half. Down here, the temperature changes slowly, gently, almost politely. You adjust your posture again, settling closer to the ground. Your breathing matches the quiet. Each inhale feels less sharp. Each exhale lingers longer in the air before fading. The earth is doing what it has always done, holding, insulating, protecting, and you stay with that sensation, letting it sink in, knowing that everything built above this point is only an extension of this first. Essential choice: to trust the ground. You do not dig just anywhere. That becomes clear almost immediately. Standing still, you begin to notice how the land quietly separates safe places from dangerous ones. It does not announce this distinction. It waits for you to pay attention. Your feet feel it first. Some ground holds firm under pressure. Other patches give slightly, even when frozen. That softness is a warning. Water lingers there. Snow melts unevenly. In spring, it will turn treacherous. You move away from it without needing to explain why. Long experience shows that choosing the right ground mattered more than how deep or wide a shelter was dug. A poorly chosen site could flood, collapse, or freeze from below. A well-chosen one could protect a family through winters that lasted far longer than anyone wanted to count. You lift your eyes and look around. The slope of the land matters. Flat ground might seem appealing, but it invites water to sit. A gentle incline lets meltwater run past instead of through you. Too steep, though, and soil becomes unstable. The land asks for moderation, not extremes. Archaeological evidence makes one thing clear. Many underground shelters were positioned on south-facing slopes, not because of aesthetics, because the winter sun, low and weak as it is, still offers warmth when invited correctly. Light enters briefly. Warming surfaces just enough to matter. Snow melts a little faster near the entrance. Ice loosens its grip sooner. You crouch and scoop a handful of soil. You rub it between your fingers. It should crumble, not smear. Clay-heavy ground holds water. Sandy soil drains too fast and collapses easily. The best ground sits in between, cooperative, but not fragile. People learned this without charts or instruments. They learned it by watching what failed. There is a quiet confidence in this knowledge. You do not rush. You circle potential sites slowly. You look for signs of animal activity. Burrows indicate stable ground. Absence of life can be a warning. Even animals avoid places that shift or flood. A small but telling detail appears again and again in regional studies. Builders often avoided the lowest point in a landscape, even when it seemed sheltered. Cold air sinks. At night, it pools in depressions. Settling too low means waking up colder than expected, even underground. A slightly raised position makes a measurable difference. You feel the wind now, brushing across your face. It has a direction. It almost always does. Trees lean subtly. Snowdrifts form patterns. You note where gusts strike hardest. Your shelter will not face that way. It does not need to. There is wide agreement that entrances were oriented away from prevailing winter winds whenever possible. This reduced heat loss and kept snow from being driven inside. The land itself acts as a shield if you let it. You begin to realize how much of this process happens quietly. There is no ceremony, no dramatic moment of decision, just a series of small observations stacking into certainty. You choose a place where the earth feels steady, where water moves past rather than collects, where sunlight can reach briefly, and where wind has less influence. None of this guarantees comfort. It only increases your odds. Some interpretations suggest that this careful site selection also carried social meaning. Settling in a good place was a sign of wisdom. Others caution against reading symbolism into everything. Sometimes practicality is simply practicality. The truth likely shifts with time, tribe, and circumstance. You kneel again and press your ear close to the ground. It sounds strange, but people did this. Listening revealed hollows, hidden water, unstable layers. Sound travels differently through solid earth. A dull thud reassures. A hollow echo does not. One overlooked habit recorded by early observers is that builders often waited through at least one storm before committing fully to a site. They watched how snow drifted, where water ran, how wind changed direction. Patience here prevented disaster later. You straighten slowly, feeling the cold pull at your joints. This is work done in stages, not hours. Rushing wastes energy. Energy in winter is currency. You imagine digging now, but not yet. First, the ground must agree to hold you. The modern impulse is to dominate land, flatten it, reinforce it, force it into compliance. That impulse would not last long here. Underground living depends on cooperation. You accept limits. You adapt shape to soil, not the other way around. There is still disagreement among researchers about how often sites were reused year after year. Some evidence suggests families return to the same locations each winter. Other findings point to more frequent relocation, driven by game patterns or resource shifts. Both may be true in different places. You let that question drift past. It does not change what you feel now. The wind sharpens. You pull your arms closer to your body. The cold reminds you why mistakes here matter. Choosing the wrong ground does not just mean discomfort. It can mean waking up wet, or not waking up at all. You step once more across the chosen spot. It feels right. Not welcoming. Not warm. Just dependable. Dependability is everything. Soon, you will dig. Soon, the earth will close around you in a way that feels deliberate, even kind. But that only works because of what you are doing now. Watching. Waiting. Choosing carefully. You take a final look around, committing landmarks to memory. Trees. Stones. The curve of the slope. Snow begins to fall again. Light and dry. Whispering across the ground. You are ready. And beneath your feet, the earth is ready too. You begin to dig. But not with urgency. That would be a mistake. Winter punishes haste. Every movement costs energy. And energy must be rationed like food. So you work slowly. Deliberately. Letting rhythm replace force. The first layer resists you. Frozen soil cracks rather than yields. Each strike sends a dull vibration up your arms. You pause often. Not out of weakness, but awareness. Digging generates heat. And sweat in winter is dangerous. Damp clothing steals warmth faster than bare skin ever could. You slow your breathing. You stop before you need to. As the frozen crust gives way, the soil changes character. It becomes heavier, darker, more cooperative. This is where effort turns productive. You scrape and lift. Scrape and lift. Building a shallow pit rather than a hole. Depth comes later. Shape comes first. There is strong evidence that many underground shelters were dug wider before they were dug deeper. This reduced the risk of collapse and allowed builders to read the soil as they went. Cracks, sloughing edges, unexpected moisture, all spoke clearly if you knew how to listen. You begin to sense the difference between soil that wants to stand and soil that wants to fall. The walls angle inward slightly. Straight vertical cuts invite collapse. A gentle curve distributes weight. The earth responds well to respect. You rest. Sitting on the edge of the pit, your breath fogs briefly, then fades. Even now, with no roof, the air feels calmer inside the depression. Wind skims over the top rather than rushing in. Snow falls past you instead of onto you. This is the first quiet reward. One detail that often surprises modern readers is how few tools were required. Digging sticks, stone blades, antler tools, even sharpened wood were enough. The ground was shaped gradually. Not violently. Patience replaced steel. Some early observers recorded that people sang or spoke softly while digging. Not ritual, not prayer. Just rhythm. Sound helped regulate movement. It slowed the body. It prevented overexertion. This detail appears rarely. But when it does, it feels human in a way diagrams never capture. You dig again, widening the space, keeping edges smooth. Sharp corners weaken structures. Curves endure. This principle appears again and again in long-lasting shelters. There is general agreement among researchers that many underground homes were built collaboratively. Digging alone is possible, but dangerous. Soil collapses without warning. Extra hands meant faster response, safer progress, and shared judgment when something felt wrong. But even in groups, there was no rushing. Winter lasts long enough. A shelter built poorly will fail before the season ends. You pause and feel the temperature change as you move lower. It is subtle, but present. The cold from above fades slightly. The earth holds steady. It does not warm you. It simply stops stealing warmth. That is enough. You scoop soil and set it aside. This earth will be used later. Packed onto walls. Shaped into roofs. Nothing is discarded without thought. Waste is a luxury reserved for easier climates. A curious pattern appears when you look closely at excavation sites. Builders often stopped digging at a depth that allowed a person to sit comfortably, not stand. Standing increases heat loss. Sitting conserves it. Lying down conserves even more. The space shapes behavior intentionally. You slide down into the pit now. Testing it. Your shoulders brush the sides. That is fine. The shelter is not meant to impress. It is meant to hold. There is still uncertainty among specialists about how standardized measurements were. Some argue that body-based measurements were used. Arm spans, elbow to fingertip. Others suggest more flexible judgment. Adjusted by feel. The evidence allows for more than one explanation. You lean back and look up. The sky feels farther away already. Snowflakes drift past the opening. Silent. Unhurried. The world above continues. Down here, time thickens. Digging deeper now becomes easier. The soil cuts cleanly. You angle the floor slightly to prevent water from pooling. Even in winter, melt can happen. Fires create warmth. Bodies create warmth. Warmth creates moisture. Managing moisture is as important as managing cold. You scrape channels into the floor edges. Subtle slopes that guide water away from sleeping areas. This knowledge is rarely highlighted, but it appears consistently in well-preserved sites. Dryness equals warmth. Dampness equals danger. You stop again. Your muscles hum quietly. Not pain. Awareness. You stretch your fingers, then curl them again. Some accounts describe builders covering unfinished pits overnight, especially during storms. Snow accumulation inside an open pit creates extra work. Worse, it creates ice. Prevention is easier than removal. You imagine laying branches across the opening, covering them with hides or woven mats, letting snow slide off rather than fall in. Even partially complete. The shelter already demands care. You resume digging, smoothing walls, removing loose material. Each pass makes the space feel more intentional, less whole, more room. It becomes clear that digging is not just excavation. It is shaping a boundary between you and winter. Every handful of soil removed increases that boundary slightly. Every pause preserves the energy needed to finish. There is disagreement among scholars about how long construction typically took. Some estimate days. Others suggest weeks, spread between weather windows. The truth likely depends on group size, soil type, and urgency. What matters is that the process was adaptable. You listen again. The ground sounds solid. No hollow echoes. No shifting. The walls hold. You sit in the center of the pit now, breathing evenly. The wind passes overhead, audible but distant. Snow continues to fall. Winter continues its work. So do you. The shelter is not finished, not even close. But it exists now, a place shaped by patience rather than force. A space that already changes how cold reaches you. You feel calmer, slower, more deliberate. And you understand that digging is not about going deeper as fast as possible. It is about stopping at the right moment. Listening, adjusting, and continuing only when the earth agrees. You pause your digging not because you are finished, but because the land asks for another decision. Depth and shape matter. Yes, but now orientation becomes everything. Where this shelter opens will decide how livable it feels when winter settles in fully. You climb out of the pit slowly and stand again in the cold. The wind greets you immediately, sharper now that you have spent time below. You turn your face toward the pale winter sun. It sits low, never climbing very high, tracing a short arc across the sky before sinking again. Its warmth is modest, but modest warmth repeated day after day adds up. You imagine the entrance where light might reach it, not flooding the space, just touching it, enough to soften the cold surfaces, enough to remind you that the world above still exists. There is broad agreement among researchers that many underground shelters were oriented with careful attention to sunlight. South-facing entrances appear again and again in cold region sites. This was not about brightness. It was about timing. Even brief winter sun can warm packed earth and dry moisture that would otherwise linger. You walk the slope slowly, feeling how the ground tilts beneath your feet. A gentle incline is ideal. Too flat, and water collects. Too steep and stability suffers. The slope lets gravity help you rather than fight you. You picture spring now, even though winter is far from over. Snow melts unevenly. Water runs downhill, always choosing the easiest path. You want that path to bypass you entirely. You want meltwater to pass by your shelter like a visitor who never stops. You kneel again at the edge of the pit and trace a line with your finger, imagining the entrance tunnel. It should angle slightly upward from the interior to the outside. This prevents cold air from sinking directly inside. Cold air is heavy. It flows downward. A rising entrance forces it to slow. This design choice appears subtle, but it is repeated across many sites. Small adjustments like this turn survival into routine. You feel the wind shift again. It brushes past your ear, then your neck. It almost always comes from the same direction in winter. Trees lean that way. Snow drifts form long tails pointing away from it. You take note. The entrance will not face into that force. Accounts from early contact periods describe how shelters with poorly oriented entrances filled with snow overnight, not because snow fell into them, but because wind pushed it relentlessly. Those shelters required constant clearing. Better ones stayed quiet. Their openings protected by land and angle. You imagine waking after a storm. You do not want your first task to be digging yourself out. The earth gives clues if you let it. Small ridges break wind. Rocks cast shadows that last longer into the day. Trees thin or thicken in response to exposure. You read these signs slowly, the way people always have when survival depended on noticing small things. One detail that does not often make it into simplified explanations is how entrances were sometimes offset rather than centered. This reduced direct airflow. Wind entering the tunnel lost strength before reaching the living space. Air still moved, but gently. Ventilation matters even in winter. Smoke must escape. Breath must be replaced with fresh air. But airflow must be controlled. Too much movement strips warmth. Too little invites danger. You imagine the roof now. Though it has not been built yet, it will slope slightly, shedding snow rather than holding it. Snow is heavy. Wet snow even more so. Accumulation creates pressure that no wall enjoys. Archaeological remains show collapsed roofs where snow load was underestimated. Those failures taught lessons that traveled through stories rather than blueprints. You return to the pit and adjust the edges where the entrance will be carved. You angle them carefully. Not dramatic, just enough to guide air and water where you want them to go. There is ongoing discussion among specialists about whether these orientation choices carried symbolic meaning tied to the sun or were purely practical. Some communities associated the rising sun with renewal. Others may have simply appreciated warmth. Both ideas can coexist without cancelling each other out. You sit again at the bottom of the shelter, imagining light entering from the chosen direction. It will arrive briefly. Predictably, it will never dominate the space. That is intentional. Darkness here is not absence. It is control. You test the angle by crouching where the entrance will be. You imagine cold air trying to rush in. It will hesitate. It will pool outside before spilling slowly inward. That delay matters. Another easily missed detail appears in excavation studies. Entrances were often kept low, not just to conserve heat, but to force movement patterns. You crawl in. You bow. You slow down. Fast movement brings cold air with it. Slow movement keeps warmth inside. You picture someone returning from hunting. Breath steaming. Body exhausted. They duck. Crawl. Pause. Cold air stays near the entrance. Warm air stays deeper inside. The design teaches behavior without instruction. You adjust the slope of the floor slightly again, aligning it with the entrance channel. Water will flow outward. Smoke will rise inward, toward the opening above. Some interpretations suggest that builders tested airflow using smoke before finalizing openings. Small fires revealed how air moved. If smoke lingered, adjustments followed. This was trial and correction, repeated until it worked. You breathe deeply now and imagine that smoke. You imagine it drifting upward, slipping out gently rather than swirling back toward you. Safety here is quiet. It is not obvious. It is felt over time. A night without coughing, a morning without frost on bedding, an entrance not blocked by snow. You run your hand along the wall again. It feels smooth, intentional. You feel a sense of calm settle into your chest. The shelter is beginning to feel less like a hole and more like a place. Winter still waits above. It always will. But each decision you make reduces its reach. You lean back and close your eyes briefly, feeling the shape of the space forming around you in your mind. Light will come. Air will move. Water will pass by without staying. The sun will touch this place. Briefly. Politely. And then it will leave you to rest. You return your attention to the entrance. And the more you think about it, the smaller it becomes in your mind. Not out of fear, out of understanding. Size here is not generosity. It is exposure. You crouch at the edge of the opening you have marked and imagine making it wide enough to walk through easily. The idea feels tempting for a moment. Comfort, after all, often looks like ease, but you dismiss it just as quickly. Ease lets winter follow you inside. So you make the opening narrow. You measure it not with tools, but with your body. Just wide enough for shoulders to pass. Just high enough to crawl without scraping too much skin from your back. Anything more would be wasted space that demands warmth without giving protection in return. Well-established findings from excavated sites show that entrances were often the coldest part of underground shelters. That is expected. They are the boundary where outside and inside meet. Keeping that boundary tight limits how much cold can enter at once. You imagine stepping inside during a storm. Snow is blowing sideways. Wind pushes hard against your body. You lower yourself, turn slightly, and slip inside. The cold follows you briefly, then stalls. It gathers near the entrance, heavy and reluctant to move farther inward. This is not accidental. Cold air sinks. Warm air rises. A small opening slows that exchange. The shelter works with gravity rather than fighting it. You smooth the edges carefully. Sharp angles catch clothing. Rough surfaces hold moisture. Everything here is shaped for repeated use. Night after night. With tired bodies moving slowly. There is a pattern seen across many regions. Entrances were often offset from the main living space, not opening directly into it. This created a buffer zone, a pause, a place where cold could settle before reaching sleeping areas. You imagine this buffer like a held breath. The shelter inhales slowly, exhales warmth carefully. One quietly practical habit sometimes mentioned in oral histories is that people lingered briefly near the entrance after entering, letting their breath warm the space before moving fully inside. This reduced the shock of cold air spreading deeper. It also allowed snow clinging to clothing to fall away before melting where it mattered. You adjust the entrance slope again, ensuring it rises slightly as it leads out. Cold air resists climbing. Warm air prefers to rise. This simple incline changes how the shelter breathes. Researchers consistently note that entrances were often reinforced more carefully than other parts of the shelter. This makes sense. Stress concentrates there. Traffic wears it down. Ice forms and melts. Without reinforcement, collapse becomes likely. You imagine lining the entrance with wood, stone, or tightly packed sod. Not decorative, structural. The goal is stability, not beauty. There is no full consensus on whether entrances were intentionally concealed from a distance or simply blended naturally into the landscape. Some evidence suggests camouflage was deliberate, especially in regions where conflict or animal intrusion posed risks. Other examples show entrances clearly visible, marked by routine use rather than secrecy. Either way, the small opening serves another purpose. It keeps animals out. Large predators hesitate to enter tight spaces. Smaller animals can be discouraged with coverings, hides, or simple barriers. The shelter becomes defensible without aggression. You kneel and imagine closing the entrance at night, a hide pulled across it, a mat woven from grasses, snow piled lightly against the outside. Each layer reduces airflow. Each layer adds insulation. This practice appears in multiple cultures across different climates. Blocking openings at night conserves warmth. Opening them briefly during the day refreshes air. The rhythm becomes part of daily life. You sit just inside the entrance now, testing the feel of it. Your breath clouds the air briefly, then drifts upward. You listen. Wind roars outside. Inside, it becomes a distant murmur. The contrast is striking. You are close enough to danger to hear it, but far enough to ignore it. There is still discussion among experts about how often entrances were modified during winter. Some believe they remained fixed once built. Others suggest people adjusted them as conditions changed, narrowing them during extreme cold and widening them slightly when temperatures eased. The evidence allows for flexibility rather than a single rule. You run your hand along the interior wall near the opening. It feels cooler here. That is expected. You note where warmth fades and returns. This awareness will guide where you sleep, where you sit, where you store things that must not freeze. You realize that the entrance teaches discipline. It forces you to slow down, to lower yourself, to move intentionally. There is no rushing inside with arms full of cold air and snow. Modern buildings often fail at this. Wide doors fling open. Heat escapes instantly. Cold floods in. Here, every movement is moderated by design. You imagine returning after a long day outside. Your muscles ache. Your face stings from wind. You crouch, crawl, pause. The cold peels away layer by layer as you move inward. By the time you reach the center of the shelter, winter feels distant. That transition matters psychologically as much as physically. It marks the boundary between exposure and rest. A small but telling observation from excavated sites is that entrance tunnels often show more wear than any other part of the shelter. Polished surfaces, smoothed edges. This space was used constantly. It was familiar. Trusted. You feel that trust now as you sit just inside. Breathing slowly. The shelter is beginning to feel complete in its basic shape. Walls hold. Floor drains. Orientation favors warmth. The entrance controls exchange. Nothing here is excessive. Nothing here is accidental. You lean back and let your shoulders rest against the earth. The ceiling feels close, but not oppressive. The small opening behind you glows faintly with reflected snowlight. It is enough. Outside, winter continues to press. Inside, it loses its leverage. You understand now why discomfort at the threshold is a sign of safety deeper in. The entrance asks something of you so the shelter can give something back. And as you settle farther inside, leaving the opening behind, you feel warmth gather slowly, quietly, earned rather than given. You sit deeper inside the shelter now, and the first fire is no longer an abstract idea. It becomes necessary. Cold has been slowed, but it has not been defeated. Heat must be invited carefully, or it will turn against you just as quickly. Fire underground is not casual. It is watched. It is negotiated with. You gather what little fuel you have prepared. Dry wood, precious and limited, dung, when available, dried thoroughly long before winter arrived. Grass is twisted tight. Every choice matters. Wet fuel smolders. Smoldering creates smoke. Smoke underground is not dramatic. It is silent. It creeps into lungs and eyes without urgency, which makes it dangerous. You build the fire small, not in the center of the space, but offset slightly, closer to where smoke can rise toward the opening you planned so carefully. The hearth is shallow. Stones line it, not for decoration, but to hold heat and prevent sparks from biting into the floor. Archaeological remains consistently show shallow hearths in underground shelters, often no more than a slight depression ringed with stone or packed earth. These fires were not meant to blaze. They were meant to persist. You strike flame and watch it catch slowly. The light flickers across the walls, revealing textures you had not noticed before. Finger marks in packed soil. Small cracks that do not move. The ceiling darkens where smoke once brushed past it, leaving a stain that tells a story of careful balance. You wait. The first instinct is always to add more fuel. You resist it. A fire that grows too quickly produces more smoke than warmth. You want a steady heat, not a show. You watch how smoke behaves. It rises, then hesitates. It curls along the ceiling briefly before finding the exit. That pause is important. Too long. And adjustments are needed. Too short. And heat escapes with it. There is solid evidence that smoke holes were among the most carefully managed features of underground shelters. Open too wide, and warmth disappears. Too narrow, and air becomes unsafe. Builders learn to read smoke the way sailors read wind. You feel your eyes sting slightly. You shift a stone. The smoke responds. It lifts, thins, finds its path. The sting fades. This is conversation, not control. Some accounts from early observers describe people using a small bundle of damp material briefly waved near the fire to test airflow. The extra smoke revealed weak circulation immediately. Adjustments followed before anyone settled in for the night. You sit back on your heels and feel warmth begin to spread. Not dramatically, but steadily. It reaches your hands first, then your knees. The floor remains cool. That is intentional. Warm floors create rising air currents that pull smoke downward. Cool floors keep air stable. There is ongoing discussion among specialists about whether smoke holes doubled as skylights during daylight hours. In some shelters, light appears to have entered through the same opening. In others, separate features were used. The truth varies by region and season. You imagine the smoke hole above, small and controlled, perhaps covered partially by a stone slab or hide that can be shifted as needed. In heavy wind, it is narrowed. In still weather, it opens slightly. Nothing here is fixed permanently. Everything responds to conditions. You add a small piece of fuel and wait again. The fire accepts it without protest. The glow deepens. Shadows stretch and settle. You notice how the walls begin to radiate warmth slowly. Earth absorbs heat reluctantly, but once it does, it releases it just as slowly. This is the quiet advantage of underground living. The shelter becomes a thermal memory. You lean forward and extend your hands. The warmth feels clean, dry, not suffocating. One often overlooked detail is how people positioned themselves relative to the fire. You do not sit directly over it. You sit slightly to the side, letting heat wash across your body without forcing you to face smoke directly. Sleeping areas remain farther away, where air is cleanest. This arrangement appears again and again in excavated sites. Fire is central, but not dominant. There is still disagreement among researchers about how often fires were kept burning continuously. Some suggest they were allowed to burn low overnight. Others propose that fires were extinguished before sleep, relying on residual heat. Evidence supports both approaches depending on fuel availability and weather severity. You imagine letting the fire settle into embers before lying down. Stones around the hearth hold warmth. Walls hold warmth. Your body holds warmth. The shelter breathes slowly. You listen now. The sound of fire is soft. A faint crackle. Outside, wind continues its work, but it feels farther away than before. Snow slides off the roof in small whispers rather than heavy thuds. You feel a sense of control return to your body. Not dominance, just competence. Smoke remains the thing you watch most carefully. Every shift in wind outside changes airflow inside. You remain attentive. A blocked opening can turn comfort into danger quickly. There is a subtle habit noted in several oral traditions. People rose during the night to check airflow. Not in panic. Calmly. A stone adjusted. A covering shifted. Then rest resumed. You imagine doing the same. waking briefly, listening, smelling the air, making a small correction, lying back down. The fire has done its job now. The chill has retreated enough to let muscles relax. Your breathing deepens. The shelter holds warmth like a secret. You realize that fire here is not entertainment. It is partnership. It gives what you ask, as long as you respect its limits. Modern minds often imagine underground fires as smoky and miserable. The reality, when done well, is surprisingly gentle. Clear air, soft light, slow warmth. You lean back against the wall and let your shoulders rest. The earth behind you feels warmer now than it did before. It has learned the fire already. Outside, winter continues its long work. Inside, you have learned how to invite heat without inviting danger. You watch the embers pulse softly, then settle, and you know that tonight, the fire will not betray you. The fire settles into a steady rhythm, and with it, your attention shifts to where your body will finally rest. Warmth alone does not guarantee sleep. How you position yourself in this space matters just as much as how it was built. You lower yourself closer to the ground and feel the temperature change immediately. The air near the floor is cooler, heavier. This is where cold collects. Slowly and patiently. You do not fight it. You plan around it. Sleeping low is not a mistake here. It is deliberate. Raised platforms would expose you to more moving air. The floor, especially when layered correctly, offers stillness. Stillness conserves heat. Archaeological patterns show that sleeping areas in underground shelters were typically arranged around the perimeter, away from entrances and slightly removed from the fire. This positioning balanced warmth and clean air. Smoke rose toward the center and escaped upward, while the edges remained calmer. You begin laying down what will separate you from the earth. First, dry grasses or reeds, gathered long before winter arrived. They crackle softly as you spread them. Their purpose is simple. They trap air. Trapped air slows heat loss. On top of that, hides, deer, bison, or whatever the land provided. The fur side faces inward. Touching skin or clothing, the hide side faces down, resisting moisture. This layering is not decorative, it is survival refined. You kneel and press your hand into the bedding. It gives slightly. That matters. Hard surfaces steal warmth faster. Soft layers create pockets where body heat can linger. There is strong evidence that families often slept close together in winter. Not for sentiment. For efficiency. Bodies are heat sources. Shared warmth reduces the need for fuel. The shelter becomes a system rather than a collection of individuals. You imagine lying down beside others. Breath sinking unconsciously. Movement slowing. The space grows warmer not from fire alone, but from presence. One small but revealing detail appears in some excavation sites. Bedding areas are often thicker along the walls than in the center. This suggests that people leaned or rested against the earth itself, using it as both backrest and thermal mass. You settle into position now, testing where warmth gathers best. You adjust slightly. A hand here, a shoulder there. You feel the difference immediately. The ceiling feels close above you, but it no longer feels limiting. It feels protective. Heat rises and stays trapped. Sound remains muted. Outside becomes something you remember, rather than something you endure. There is still debate about whether people slept directly on the ground or on low raised edges built into the shelter walls. Some sites show clear ledges shaped into the earth. Others do not. The choice likely depended on soil type, moisture, and tradition. You imagine resting on a shallow ledge, just high enough to avoid the coldest air, but low enough to remain protected. The difference might only be a few inches. But in winter, inches matter. You pull a hide over your body now. Not tight. Loose enough to trap air. Tight coverings compress insulation and reduce effectiveness. This is a detail learned through long nights and stiff mornings. Your breathing slows. The fire crackles softly. Embers glow rather than flare. One often overlooked habit is how people adjusted bedding throughout the night. If cold crept in, layers shifted. If warmth built too much, coverings loosened. Sleep here is not unconscious. It is responsive. You turn slightly and notice how your breath rises toward the ceiling before drifting toward the smoke hole. Fresh air enters near the floor, replaces what you exhale, then leaves. The shelter breathes with you. This balance between warmth and air is fragile. You remain aware of it even as your body begins to relax. Comfort does not mean inattention. There is some disagreement among scholars about whether people slept fully through the night during winter or woke periodically to tend fire and adjust ventilation. Many believe sleep came in segments. Rest. Wakefulness. Rest again. The pattern fit the environment. You imagine waking briefly, checking the embers, shifting a stone, pulling a hide tighter, then lying back down. No alarm, no urgency, just maintenance. The ground beneath you holds steady. It does not radiate warmth aggressively, but it no longer drains it either. The earth has accepted the heat it was given and now returns it slowly. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. Wind outside, fire inside, breathing around you. The sounds blend into something consistent, predictable. Predictability is comfort. Modern ideas of sleep often rely on separation. Individual beds, individual rooms. Here, separation wastes heat. Togetherness conserves it. Privacy yields to survival without resentment. You shift again, finding the exact spot where your body feels supported. Not sinking, not strained. Supported. A subtle but meaningful observation from preserved shelters is the absence of unnecessary movement paths near sleeping areas. Traffic stayed near entrances and hearths. Sleep remained undisturbed. The shelter enforced calm. You feel that calm now. Your muscles soften. Your jaw unclenches. The day's effort settles into your bones. Firelight flickers across the walls, then dims as fuel turns to embers. The shelter holds the warmth it has gathered. Outside, snow continues to fall, unnoticed. You draw the hide closer around your shoulders and exhale slowly. The air is clean. The space is quiet. The earth holds you without pressure. Sleep here is not an escape. It is part of the system, a way to conserve energy, restore strength, and wait for daylight. You allow your breathing to deepen further. Each breath warms the air slightly. Each exhale releases tension. Winter remains above, vast and indifferent. Down here, you have found a rhythm that lets you endure it without fear. You settle fully now, letting the shelter do what it was designed to do. Hold you. You wake slowly, not because something is wrong, but because the shelter has shifted its quiet balance. The fire has faded to embers. The air feels slightly cooler, heavier near the floor. This is expected. Night deepens before dawn loosens its grip. You do not sit up right away. Movement stirs air. Air moves heat. You stay still for a moment, listening. Above you, winter continues its steady work. Snow slides softly from the roof. Wind presses, then moves on. Inside, the sound reaches you as a distant presence rather than a threat. The earth absorbs what it can, leaving only a muted reminder of the world beyond. You shift your fingers slightly and feel the hide beneath you. It remains dry. That matters. Moisture steals warmth faster than cold ever could. The layered bedding has done its job through the night. You inhale deeply. The air smells faintly of smoke, but not sharply. Clean enough. Safe. The shelter breathes slowly, exchanging air without urgency. You roll onto your side and feel how warmth lingers along the walls. The earth remembers the fire. That memory releases itself gradually, long after flames have died. This is one of the quiet strengths of underground living. You push yourself up carefully and move toward the hearth. Embers glow faintly, red buried under ash. You coax them gently, not rushing. A small breath, a shift of ash, a piece of dry fuel placed just so. The fire returns reluctantly, then willingly. A soft crackle, a glow that deepens rather than flares. Evidence from excavated shelters shows repeated layers of ash built up over time, often carefully cleared rather than left to accumulate. Ash insulates, but too much smothers fire and clogs airflow. Maintenance here is constant but light. You warm your hands slowly. No sudden movements, no wasted gestures. The day will demand effort. You conserve where you can. You glance toward the entrance. Light has not yet reached it. Dawn is near. But winter mornings arrive late and reluctantly. The shelter remains in its night state, holding warmth close, keeping cold at bay. You notice how the cold settles predictably near the floor. You adjust your position slightly, lifting your legs onto bedding rather than leaving them exposed. These small habits accumulate into comfort. One recurring observation from well-preserved shelters is how living spaces remained uncluttered. Tools were stored neatly. Food was placed carefully. Movement paths remained clear. Disorder wastes energy. In winter, wasted energy becomes risk. You check stored items briefly. Dried food remains firm. No frost has touched it. Underground storage takes advantage of stable temperatures. The earth protects not only people, but provisions. There is ongoing discussion among researchers about how frequently people left shelters during the coldest periods. Some suggest long stretches of indoor life, with brief forays for fuel or food. Others argue for daily routines that balanced exposure and necessity. Both patterns appear across different regions. You imagine preparing yourself for a short trip outside. You will need fuel. You will need fresh air. You will need to check conditions. But not yet. First, you tend to the inside. You sweep ash gently aside, clearing airflow. You adjust a stone near the smoke opening. Smoke lifts cleanly now. Finding its path without hesitation, the shelter responds immediately. This responsiveness builds trust. You know what to expect here. You sit again and let warmth gather. The earth presses gently against your back. It feels solid, reliable. One small but telling detail noted by early observers is how people oriented themselves within shelters based on time of day. Morning positions differed from evening ones. Light mattered. Heat mattered. Everything shifted with purpose. You wait for the faint glow that signals sunrise reaching the entrance. It will not enter dramatically. Just a pale wash of reflected light. Enough to tell you the night has loosened its grip. When it comes, it feels reassuring rather than exciting. Daylight here does not promise ease. It promises work. You stretch carefully, rolling shoulders, flexing fingers. Muscles stiffen in cold if neglected. Gentle movement restores circulation without waste. You consider stepping outside. You hesitate. Listening again. Wind sounds lighter now. Snowfall has eased. Conditions are acceptable. You move toward the entrance slowly, keeping your body low. The transition from warmth to cold must be gradual. Sudden exposure shocks the system. You pause just inside the opening. Cold air gathers there. Waiting. You let it brush your face lightly before committing. This prepares you. It dulls the edge. Outside, winter greets you immediately. The contrast sharpens your senses. Your breath clouds. Snow reflects pale light. The land looks unchanged. But you know better. You gather what you need quickly. Fuel collected earlier lies ready. You do not wander. Wandering wastes energy. Every step outside is intentional. You return inside with equal care, closing the entrance behind you. Cold follows briefly, then stalls. Heavy and reluctant to move deeper, you linger near the entrance, letting your breath warm the space before moving fully inside. Snow falls from clothing. It stays near the threshold where it belongs. You feel the shelter reclaim its balance. There is still uncertainty among scholars about how people measured time during long winters spent underground. Sunlight offered limited cues. Routine filled the gaps. Fire tending, food preparation, rest cycles. The shelter itself became a clock. You settle back near the hearth and add fuel. The fire responds. The walls glow faintly. Warmth spreads again. The day will pass quietly. Tasks will be few but necessary. Everything you do will serve a purpose. You feel no urgency. The shelter has slowed you down. It has reshaped your sense of time. Winter remains outside, vast and unmoving. Inside, you have carved out a space where its reach is limited. You sit with that feeling now, steady, contained, protected. And as the fire settles into another patient burn, you understand that surviving winter is not about endurance alone. It is about rhythm. As the day moves forward, you begin to feel how the shelter changes when more than one body shares it. Warmth becomes communal rather than individual. The air shifts subtly with each movement, each breath adding to a shared atmosphere that feels alive in a quiet way. You notice how proximity matters. Sitting closer together is not about affection. It is about efficiency. Heat radiates outward from bodies, and when those radii overlap, less warmth is lost to the surrounding air. The shelter becomes warmer without adding fuel. This is physics working in your favor. You adjust your position slightly, careful not to disturb the balance. Someone nearby shifts as well. No words are exchanged. None are needed. Everyone here understands the unspoken rule. Together is warmer than apart. Material evidence from long-used shelters makes this clear. Sleeping areas cluster. Sitting spaces overlap. Empty gaps are rare. Spaces shared deliberately, shaped by necessity rather than preference. You listen to breathing around you. It settles into a slow rhythm. In cold environments, the body naturally conserves energy. Movements become economical. Speech becomes measured. Silence is not loneliness here. It is coordination. One practical detail often overlooked is how people arrange themselves based on age and strength. Elders and children stayed closer to the warmest parts of the shelter. Those more able to tolerate cold positioned themselves nearer the entrance. This distribution was not spoken. It evolved naturally. You imagine a child tucked between two adults, insulated on both sides. The child sleeps deeply, unaware of the calculations happening around them. This arrangement appears repeatedly in accounts describing winter life underground. There is broad recognition that shared warmth reduced fuel consumption significantly. Less fire meant less smoke. Less smoke meant safer air. The shelter became healthier simply by holding people together. You feel the air grow slightly warmer now as bodies settle. The walls release heat they absorbed earlier. The fire glows steadily. Nothing dramatic changes. Everything accumulates. A subtle but revealing habit emerges in descriptions of winter routines. People often adjusted their positions throughout the day, following warmth as it shifted. Morning sunlight touched one wall briefly. Evening fire warmed another. Bodies followed these changes without discussion. You lean back and let your shoulder rest against someone nearby. It feels natural. Supported. The earth presses behind you. Warmth presses beside you. The space feels complete. Some interpretations suggest that this closeness reinforced social bonds. Others argue that necessity alone drove behavior. Both views may hold truth. Shared hardship often deepens connection, whether or not that is the goal. You notice how quiet voices carry differently here. Sound does not travel far. Conversations stay contained. Laughter, when it comes, is soft. Sharp noise wastes energy and startles the calm. You adjust a hide that has slipped. It now covers two people instead of one. That small change traps more air. The effect is immediate. Archaeological layouts support this practice. Larger hides and woven coverings appear designed to span multiple bodies. They were not individual possessions. They were shared resources. You feel drowsy again. Even though the day has barely begun, cold encourages rest. Activity happens in bursts rather than long stretches. You accept this rhythm. There is still discussion about how families organize daily tasks within such close quarters. Some believe roles rotated to prevent exhaustion. Others suggest that routines remained fixed. Evidence shows flexibility rather than rigid rules. You imagine someone rising to tend the fire while others remain still. Another person prepares food quietly. Someone else watches airflow. Making a small adjustment, everyone contributes without disrupting the group. The shelter feels like a single organism now. Fire as heart, entrance as lungs, walls as skin, bodies as warmth. You sense how this closeness changes perception. Time stretches. Space compresses. The outside world feels distant, almost abstract. You think about modern ideas of personal space, how wide they are, how energy expensive they can be. Here, space is measured in usefulness, not comfort. A minor but telling detail appears in winter dwelling sites. Personal items are few and kept close. There is little clutter. Each object earns its place. Excess is burdensome. You rest your hands in your lap and feel warmth linger in your palms. Heat travels upward slowly. It feels earned. You close your eyes briefly and listen again. Breathing. Fire. Wind beyond the walls. The sounds layer into something steady. Shared warmth is not passive. It requires awareness. If someone moves too quickly, air stirs. Cold slips in. Everyone adjusts. You open your eyes and notice how the fire has shifted. Embers glow brighter on one side. You add a small piece of fuel. Not much. Just enough. There is still uncertainty among researchers about how long groups remained together underground during the harshest periods. Some evidence points to weeks. Others suggest shorter intervals punctuated by movement. Conditions likely dictated choices. You imagine days passing like this. Slow. Quiet. Repetitive in a comforting way. Each day reinforces the shelter's effectiveness. You feel your body relax further. Muscles soften. The shared warmth holds steady. Winter may be long, but it is no longer overwhelming. Underground? Together. It becomes manageable. You lean slightly toward the warmth beside you and let your breathing slow to match the rhythm around you. The shelter holds all of you now. Not as individuals, but as a single, warm presence, waiting patiently for the season to pass. As the day settles into a quieter stretch, your attention drifts downward to what lies beneath you. Not the earth itself, but the layers placed between your body and the cold ground. These layers matter more than walls in some ways. Cold does not always rush in dramatically. Often, it seeps upward, slow and patient, testing every weakness. You press your palm into the bedding again and feel how it gives slightly before firming. This softness is not accidental. It is engineered through repetition and experience. The first layer is always something that traps air. Dry grasses, reeds, or shredded bark laid thick enough to create space between fibers. Air held still becomes insulation. Air allowed to move becomes a thief. This difference decides whether sleep restores or drains you. Above that come hides. Their weight presses the plant fibers just enough to stabilize them without crushing their insulating pockets. The fur side faces upward. The hide side faces down. Moisture stays below. Warmth stays above. Remains recovered from long-used winter shelters show this pattern clearly. Multiple compressed layers suggest bedding was rebuilt often, not replaced, but refreshed. Damp material was removed. Dry material added. Maintenance here is continuous, not seasonal. You shift your legs slightly and feel how the warmth lingers. The ground no longer pulls heat aggressively. It accepts what it is given, then releases it slowly. The earth beneath the bedding becomes part of the insulation system rather than a threat. One easily missed detail appears in sites where animal remains are abundant. Smaller skins were often stitched or tied together to form larger sleeping surfaces. This created fewer gaps. Fewer gaps meant fewer places for cold air to creep in. You imagine hands working carefully, joining hides with sinew, making something wider than any single animal could provide. This was not craft for beauty. It was craft for warmth. Some traditions describe rotating bedding layers depending on conditions. During extreme cold, more plant matter was added. When weather eased slightly, Layers were reduced to prevent overheating and moisture buildup. Comfort here is responsive, not fixed. You lie back again and pull a covering over your torso. It settles gently, trapping a pocket of warmth that grows slowly, not instantly. Patience matters. There is still debate about whether people slept fully clothed or removed outer garments before rest. Evidence points in both directions. In damp conditions, removing wet clothing prevented chilling. In dry, cold, layered clothing added insulation. Choices followed circumstances rather than rules. You imagine loosening outer layers, letting them dry near the fire, then pulling a hide close instead. This keeps moisture away from your skin while preserving warmth. The smell of hides is faint but present, earthy, familiar. It blends with smoke and soil into something that feels grounding rather than unpleasant. This scent becomes associated with safety over time. You roll slightly and notice how the bedding slopes toward the wall. This is intentional. Bodies settle into the curve. Movement slows. Rest deepens. Excavated sleeping areas often show depressions worn into the earth beneath bedding. These impressions match human shapes. They speak of repeated use. Night after night. Season after season. You run your hand along the edge of the bedding and feel where it thickens near the wall. This added layer protects against cold radiating from the earth. It also offers a place to lean, supporting the spine during rest. A subtle pattern appears in shelters used by larger groups. Bedding areas are arranged to interlock rather than sit separately. One edge overlaps another. Shared warmth extends across the space. You breathe slowly and feel how the air above you remains warm and still. The ceiling traps it. The walls return it. The bedding holds it close to your body. Cold no longer feels like an active presence. It becomes background pressure, held at bay by layers of thoughtful choices. You adjust the covering slightly, creating a small opening near your face. Fresh air reaches you without flooding the rest of your body with cold. This balance matters. Stale warmth exhausts. Fresh cold invigorates. The goal is somewhere in between. There is uncertainty among researchers about how often bedding was fully replaced rather than maintained. Some believe seasonal replacement occurred. Others argue that materials were reused constantly, dried and refreshed as needed. The land likely dictated what was possible. You imagine gathering grasses during warmer months, drying them, storing them for winter use. Preparation here begins long before cold arrives. Survival underground starts above ground. You shift again. Settling deeper, the bedding responds, molding gently around you. Pressure points soften. Muscles release. Outside, winter continues its quiet work. Inside, the layers between you and the earth do their own quiet work, just as steadily. You close your eyes for a moment and focus on the feeling beneath you. Supported, insulated, protected. Sleep here is not accidental. It is constructed from soil, plants, animals, and patience. Each layer contributes something essential. You inhale and exhale slowly, letting your body sink into the warmth it has helped create. The earth beneath you no longer feels cold. It feels like part of the shelter itself. Your thoughts turn now to food, not in the way hunger demands it, but in the quieter way planning always does in winter. Eating is not just about today. It is about making sure tomorrow feels possible. Underground living reshapes how food is treated, stored, and respected. You look toward the darker corner of the shelter where supplies are kept. The temperature there feels different, cooler than the sleeping area, steadier than the air near the entrance. This is intentional. Cold preserves when it is controlled. Evidence from excavated winter shelters shows that food was often stored below ground level, sometimes in pits dug into the floor, sometimes in adjacent chambers. These spaces benefited from stable temperatures that slowed spoilage without freezing everything solid. You kneel and brush aside a covering. Beneath it, dried meat rests wrapped in hide. Hard, dark, dense. It smells faintly smoky. Not unpleasant. This food was prepared months ago. long before snow arrived. The effort invested then protects you now. You break off a small piece and chew slowly. Eating too fast wastes energy. Digestion produces heat. But heavy meals tax the body. Balance matters here too. Stored roots come next. Tubers gathered and dried, then packed carefully. They retain enough moisture to remain edible, but not enough to rot. Underground. The earth keeps them from extreme swings in temperature. You notice how the storage area stays dry. Moisture is the enemy of stored food. The shelter design keeps water moving away. Bedding and fire remain separate. Nothing drips here by accident. A recurring observation in archaeological records is how carefully storage pits were lined. Grass, bark, sometimes stone. These linings prevented direct contact with damp soil and discouraged pests. Even underground, vigilance mattered. You sit back and listen. No scurrying, no movement. The shelter is quiet. That quiet signals success. One small but revealing detail emerges from studies of winter storage. Food was often rotated rather than consumed in one direction. Older items were used first. Fresh reserves were protected. This prevented waste and spread effort evenly across the season. You imagine marking this mentally, not with writing, but with memory. The position of bundles, the feel of hides, the smell of smoke. Your senses track time better than calendars ever could. Some accounts suggest that food storage spaces were kept separate from sleeping areas not only for hygiene, but for psychological comfort. Knowing supplies were protected allowed rest to come easier. Anxiety wastes energy. You feel that ease now. Hunger exists, but it is not urgent. The knowledge that food remains available changes how the body responds to cold. There is still discussion among specialists about how often storage pits were reopened during winter. Some evidence suggests daily access. Other findings indicate longer intervals to preserve stable conditions. Both patterns appear in different regions. You imagine checking stores briefly each day, confirming nothing has changed. This ritual reassures without disturbing balance. You prepare a small portion of food near the fire, warming it just enough to soften. Not cooking. Cooking requires fuel. Fuel is limited. Warmth enhances flavor and digestibility without waste. You eat slowly, feeling heat spread outward from your stomach. It reaches your hands, your feet. Not dramatic, just steady. The shelter responds. Warmth rises. Walls absorb. Air remains calm. A subtle but important habit noted in winter living spaces is how scraps were handled. Nothing edible was discarded carelessly. Bones were saved for tools or broth. Fat was precious. Even small fragments had purpose. You set aside what remains carefully. Everything has a place. Order here is not aesthetic. It is protective. You wipe your hands and feel the texture of hide beneath your fingers. Smooth from use. Familiar. The shelter feels lived in now. Not temporary. You glance toward the entrance again. Light has shifted slightly. The day moves forward quietly. Time underground feels thicker. Minutes stretch. Hours blur gently. Some researchers note that this altered sense of time may have influenced storytelling traditions. Long winter days invited narrative. Stories filled space where movement could not. Food and warmth sustained the body. Story sustained the mind. You imagine voices rising softly later. Not now. Now is for rest after eating. Digestion draws blood inward. Movement slows naturally. You lean back and let your body settle. The food sits comfortably. The warmth lingers. Outside, winter remains unchanged. Inside, the shelter continues its work. You feel grateful without naming it, not to an abstract idea, but to the systems that hold you. The earth, the preparation, the careful choices repeated over generations. You close your eyes briefly and breathe in the scent of smoke and stored food. It smells like continuity. When you open them again, the storage area remains just as you left it. Quiet, stable, ready. You know that as long as the shelter holds and the stores remain dry, winter becomes something you live through rather than endure. Food underground is not abundance. It is enough. And enough is everything. You become aware of sound again. Not because it has grown louder, but because you have learned to hear it differently. Underground. Sound behaves in unfamiliar ways. It does not travel far. It does not echo dramatically. It presses gently against the walls and fades. You pause and listen. Above you, winter moves constantly. Wind sweeps across open land. Snow shifts. Ice settles. Sometimes a branch cracks under weight. Sometimes snow slides from a roof edge. Each sound arrives softened, as if wrapped in cloth before reaching you. This muffling is one of the quiet gifts of Earth. Packed soil absorbs vibration. What would be sharp and startling above becomes distant and manageable below. Observations from long-used underground dwellings show that this reduction in noise had real effects on stress and rest. Constant exposure to wind noise exhausts the body over time. Removing that stimulus allows muscles to relax more fully. You notice how your shoulders sit lower now than they did outside. Your jaw remains unclenched. Your breathing stays slow. The shelter does not just block cold. It dulls the relentless pressure of sound. You hear the fire first. A soft crackle. Then the breathing of others. Even that seems quieter than it should be. The earth absorbs excess, leaving only what is necessary. Outside, a gust rises suddenly. You hear it as a low, passing rush rather than a scream. It slides over the roof, finds no edge to grab, and moves on. Snow follows, whispering as it shifts. You imagine the same storm above ground, canvas snapping, wood creaking, teeth chattering. Here, the storm becomes background. There is solid evidence that people who lived underground during winter slept longer and more deeply than those in surface shelters. Reduced noise likely played a role. When the environment feels predictable, the body releases vigilance. You lie back and test this. You focus on the sounds around you. They repeat. Fire, breath, distant wind. Nothing unexpected intrudes. Even silence behaves differently here. It is not empty. It is full of muted presence. You feel enclosed rather than isolated. One detail often overlooked in discussions of underground life is how sound was used intentionally. Voices stayed low. Tools were handled carefully. Sharp noise traveled farther than expected in enclosed spaces. Quiet was maintained not by rules, but by awareness. You notice how people move. Feet slide rather than step. Objects are set down gently. The shelter teaches calm through feedback. Some accounts describe winter nights spent listening to storms pass overhead. Knowing they could not reach you, that awareness brought a sense of security that surface dwellings struggled to provide. You listen now as snow begins again. Light at first, then steadier. Each flake lands above, muffled instantly. There is no drumming on a roof. No weight pressing down dramatically. Snow accumulates silently. This silence signals insulation. Snow on the roof adds another layer of protection, trapping heat further. The storm becomes an ally rather than a threat. You shift slightly and feel the bedding adjust. No creak, no rustle. Even movement feels quieter here. Researchers studying winter shelters note that this sound dampening may have influenced communication styles. Gestures replaced speech. Eye contact replaced calls across space. Energy conservation extended to voice. You imagine someone pointing rather than speaking. A nod instead of a sentence. Efficiency replaces explanation. The shelter holds these small adaptations easily. It rewards them. You close your eyes and let the sounds blend. Fire breath, wind whisper, snow hush. Your mind begins to drift. Not because you are tired, but because there is nothing demanding attention. Alertness softens naturally. You think briefly of predators outside. Wolves, coyotes, animals that move easily through winter. You listen for them. Nothing reaches you. Earth blocks scent. Sound fades. The shelter disappears into the land. It does not announce itself. Some interpretations suggest that underground shelters offered psychological safety as much as physical. The sense of being hidden reduced fear. Others argue that danger was simply less present in winter. Both ideas likely overlap. You hear a distant howl carried faintly through the soil. It arrives softened. Almost unreal. The sound does not trigger panic. It passes. You feel your heartbeat remain steady. Your breathing does not change. Above ground, that same sound might sharpen senses. Below, it loses urgency. You turn your head slightly and feel the wall close. Solid, unmoving. The earth does not tremble. It holds. Sound, like cold, loses its edge underground. You realize now how much of winter hardship comes from constant stimulation. Wind noise, visual movement, unpredictable change. Remove those, and endurance becomes easier. You listen again. The fire settles deeper into embers. The sound shifts from crackle to occasional sigh. This signals warmth stored, not burning. The shelter has entered its quiet phase. You allow yourself to sink into it. Thoughts slow. Muscles soften. Snow continues to fall. Wind continues to move. Animals continue their paths. All of it happens above you. Down here, sound becomes a distant reminder rather than an intrusion. You breathe in, then out, matching the shelter's rhythm. And for the first time in a long while, winter sounds like something happening elsewhere. As the quiet settles more deeply, your thoughts drift from the practical to something softer. The shelter is doing its work so well that your mind has space to wander. Underground living does that. Once immediate danger recedes, reflection takes its place. You lean back against the wall and feel the earth press gently into your spine. It does not feel cold now. It feels present, steady, almost attentive. For many Native American communities, living within the earth was not only a response to winter, it carried meaning that extended beyond survival. The ground was not seen as inert matter. It was alive in its own way. It fed plants. It held water. It received the dead. It offered protection. You rest inside it now, surrounded on all sides. And it is difficult not to feel that symbolism settle into your body. Accounts passed down through oral traditions often describe the earth as a relative rather than a resource. A mother, a keeper, a place of return. Winter shelters dug into the ground reflected this worldview naturally. You did not hide from the earth. You returned to it. This idea appears quietly rather than dramatically. There are no altars here, no carvings demanding attention. Meaning is carried through use rather than display. You think about the shape of the shelter. Rounded walls, curved ceilings, nothing sharp, nothing aggressive. The space feels enclosed in a way that resembles rest rather than confinement. Some anthropologists suggest that this resemblance to the womb was not accidental. Living underground during winter mirrored cycles seen in nature. Seeds lay beneath the soil until spring. Animals burrowed. Life retreated inward before emerging again. Others caution against reading symbolism, where practicality alone may explain form. Earth curves naturally when dug. Straight lines collapse. Round shapes endure. The truth may not require choosing one explanation over the other. You let that uncertainty sit comfortably. Meaning does not have to be singular. You notice how daily actions inside the shelter take on a quiet rhythm. Fire is tended. Food is shared. Sleep comes and goes. These routines feel grounding, both physically and mentally. Repetition offers reassurance. In many traditions, winter was a time for stories. Long nights invited memory, history, lessons, and humor were carried through voice rather than written record. Underground shelters, quiet and protected, became ideal spaces for this exchange. You imagine voices rising softly now, stories unfolding slowly, children listening, eyes reflecting firelight, elders speaking with pauses that allow meaning to settle. The earth holds those voices gently. It absorbs sharp edges. It keeps stories close. Some researchers point out that ceremonial structures in certain cultures also incorporated earth, either partially or fully underground. While winter shelters were not ceremonial spaces themselves, the familiarity of living within the ground may have shaped how sacred spaces were conceived. You feel the connection without needing it explained. The shelter feels different from a surface building, more intimate, less separate from the land. You place your palm flat against the wall again. It feels cool and firm. There is comfort in that firmness. It does not shift. It does not argue. It simply holds. There is ongoing discussion about how spiritual beliefs influenced architectural choices and how architecture, in turn, reinforced belief. Did people feel closer to the earth because they lived within it? Or did they live within it because they already felt that closeness? The question remains open. You do not need the answer tonight. You consider how winter changes perspective. Above ground, survival often feels like a struggle against elements. Underground, it feels more like cooperation. The earth blocks wind. Snow adds insulation. Darkness encourages rest. This shift likely shaped how people understood their place in the world. Not above nature. Not outside it. Within it. You feel that now as your breathing syncs with the stillness around you. Each inhale draws air that has passed through soil. Each exhale returns warmth to the space. There is humility in this arrangement. You depend on the earth not as a tool, but as a partner. Some traditions speak of gratitude offered to the ground when digging began, and when shelters were left behind in spring. Not formal ceremony, but acknowledgement. A recognition that taking space required respect. You imagine smoothing the walls carefully, not out of vanity, but courtesy. You are a guest here, even if the stay lasts all winter. You shift slightly and feel the bedding respond. The shelter adapts to you without complaint. Spiritual meaning here does not demand attention. It arises naturally from experience, from feeling protected when you know you should be cold, from hearing storms pass without reaching you, from waking alive after nights that could have taken everything. You understand now how living underground during winter might change how people viewed fear. Fear becomes quieter when danger feels manageable. Trust grows in its place. You close your eyes briefly and picture spring. The shelter will be left behind then. Not abandoned, but released. The earth will reclaim it slowly. Walls will soften. Roofs will sink. The space will return to the land. This impermanence matters. Shelters are not monuments. They serve a season, then fade. Life moves on. Some scholars note that this acceptance of impermanence contrasts sharply with later architectural traditions focused on permanence and dominance. Underground winter homes emphasize cycles rather than conquest. You feel aligned with that idea now. There is no urge to mark this place forever. It exists to serve, then disappear. You open your eyes and look around the dim interior. Firelight flickers gently. Shadows move slowly. The space feels calm. The earth holds you without asking anything in return beyond care. You settle deeper into that feeling, letting thoughts soften, letting the shelter do what it has done for generations. Hold, protect, teach, and as the quiet deepens again, you feel not hidden, but held. You notice the presence of children in the shelter not by noise, but by how naturally they belong here. They move carefully without being told. They settle into spaces that already feel familiar. For them, underground life is not a response to danger. It is simply home. A child lies curled against a wall, half wrapped in a hide, breathing evenly. There is no fear in their posture, no tension held in small shoulders. This space does not feel temporary to them. It feels normal. For many communities, children were raised through winters underground year after year. The shelter was not a last resort. It was a seasonal rhythm. Just as summer brought movement and openness, winter brought stillness and enclosure. Evidence from long-occupied sites shows wear patterns that suggest years of repeated use by families. Small handprints pressed into packed earth, smoothed edges at child height. These traces speak quietly of daily life rather than crisis. You watch how children adapt to the dimness. Their eyes adjust quickly. They know where objects belong. They navigate by memory and touch as much as sight. Darkness here is not frightening. It is expected. This familiarity begins early. Children learn how to move slowly, how to keep their voices low, how to stay warm without being told. These lessons are not formal. They are absorbed through observation. You think about how different this is from learning danger through warning. Here, caution is modeled rather than explained. A child sees how an adult approaches the fire, how they duck through the entrance, how they pause to let cold settle before moving deeper inside. The shelter teaches through repetition. There is strong indication that winter shelters were places of learning as much as protection. Skills that could not be practiced outside during cold months were refined here. Tool repair, weaving, storytelling, observation. Children watched hands work. They learned patterns by seeing them repeated. Knowledge passed quietly, without instruction needing to be declared. You notice a child tracing lines in the dirt floor with a finger, copying shapes seen on tools or hides. No one stops them. This play is practice. Some researchers point out that the contained space of underground shelters created an environment where children were rarely out of sight. Supervision happened naturally. Risk was managed through proximity rather than rules. You imagine a child drifting to sleep, listening to voices murmur softly. Stories fold into dreams. The shelter becomes associated with safety and warmth rather than confinement. This early association matters. Fear is learned. So is calm. You feel how the shelter dampens sudden sounds. A dropped object does not echo harshly. A raised voice loses its edge quickly. Children grow up without constant auditory stress. Their nervous systems settle into the rhythm of winter underground. There is discussion among scholars about how this environment influenced social development. Some suggest that close quarters fostered cooperation and patience. Others argue that children also learned restraint because space demanded it. Both may be true. You notice how adults respond to children here. Corrections are gentle. Movements are slowed rather than restricted. The shelter itself enforces limits. Running is not possible. Shouting is unnecessary. You sit quietly and feel how the space shapes behavior without commands. Children adapt to temperature shifts instinctively. They pull coverings closer when cold. They loosen them when warm. These adjustments happen without drama. You imagine how such early exposure builds body awareness. Cold is not an enemy. It is a condition to be managed. One subtle observation from preserved sites is how smaller sleeping spaces were often positioned between larger ones. This suggests children slept protected on all sides. Warmth pooled around them naturally. You watch a child wake briefly, shift position, then fall back asleep. No panic, no confusion. The shelter feels consistent. Consistency is a powerful teacher. Outside, winter continues its quiet pressure. Inside, children grow, learn, and rest without needing to understand the danger held at bay. You think about memory. For a child raised this way, winter underground would not stand out as hardship. It would be remembered as time spent close to family, stories told, food shared, snow heard faintly above. Only later might they realize how much protection the shelter offered. There is some uncertainty about how children perceived the transition between seasons. Did leaving the shelter in spring feel like relief or disruption? Did openness feel freeing or exposed? Evidence does not answer this fully. You imagine the moment of emergence. Light feels stronger. Space feels wider. The child steps out, blinking. Used to enclosure. The world looks different. But that is later. For now, winter holds. And the shelter continues to shape young bodies and minds quietly. You feel a sense of continuity here. Generations passing through the same rhythms. Children growing into adults who will dig, build, and teach in turn. The shelter is not just a structure. It is a classroom, a nursery, a memory. You close your eyes briefly and listen again. Breathing. Fire. Soft movement. The presence of children adds another layer of warmth that fire cannot provide. You open your eyes and see a small figure watching the embers with quiet fascination, learning how warmth behaves, how fire lives and settles. This knowledge will stay with them. The shelter has done more than keep bodies alive. It has held lives in formation. And as winter stretches on above, underground life continues, steady and patient, shaping the next generation without needing to announce itself. Your attention shifts naturally toward the quiet work that fills the shelter during daylight hours, much of it guided by women whose movements feel both practiced and unhurried. Their work does not announce itself. It unfolds steadily, shaping the rhythm of winter days underground. You watch hands move with purpose. Food is prepared slowly, measured carefully so nothing is wasted. Hides are checked, smoothed, turned so moisture does not linger. Tools are repaired rather than replaced. Each action serves comfort, safety, and continuity. Inside the shelter, tasks blend together rather than standing apart. Someone tends the fire. Someone else prepares food nearby, careful not to crowd smoke paths. Another person mends a tear in a hide, needle moving in and out with quiet precision. These activities happen in shared space, layered rather than separated. Material remains from winter dwellings suggest that much of daily labor happened indoors during the coldest months. Grinding stones worn smooth, bone tools polished by repeated handling, fibers twisted into cordage. These marks speak of hours spent working slowly while weather raged above. You notice how posture matters. Work is done sitting or kneeling rather than standing. This conserves heat and energy. It also keeps movements contained, preventing unnecessary airflow. One easily missed detail is how women positioned themselves relative to the fire, close enough to benefit from warmth, far enough to avoid smoke. This balance required awareness, learned through repetition rather than instruction. You imagine preparing food over low heat, not boiling vigorously, not roasting aggressively. Gentle warmth softens dried meat. Roots are warmed just enough to release flavor. Cooking here supports digestion rather than impressing appetite. There is solid evidence that women were primary keepers of winter knowledge within many communities. They understood how long food would last, how bedding needed to be refreshed. When ventilation required adjustment, this knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next. You observe how these tasks shape time. Hours pass without urgency. There is no rush to finish. Winter rewards patience. Quick work invites mistakes. You feel the shelter respond to this calm. Air remains still. Warmth holds steady. The space feels balanced. Some accounts suggest that winter work underground provided a rare opportunity for focus. Outside, distractions faded. Attention narrowed to immediate needs. This concentration allowed skills to deepen. You watch someone teaching a younger person how to twist fibers evenly. Hands guide hands. No lecture follows. Learning happens through touch and repetition. The shelter supports this teaching naturally. Close quarters mean mistakes are seen and corrected gently. Knowledge does not drift away. You notice how tasks rotate throughout the day. Someone who prepared food earlier now rests. Another person takes over fire tending. This sharing prevents exhaustion. Energy remains evenly distributed. There is ongoing discussion among scholars about how labor was divided during winter months. Some evidence suggests flexibility rather than rigid roles. The shelter itself encouraged adaptability. Whoever was warm and rested handled the next task. You feel the fairness in this system. No one is idle for long. No one carries everything alone. You sit quietly and listen to the soft sounds of work. Grinding stone, rustle of hides, crackle of fire. These sounds replace the noise of wind and storm. You notice how scent changes throughout the day. Smoke thins. Food warms. Earth remains constant beneath it all. Smell becomes another signal of balance or imbalance. A subtle habit appears in many descriptions of winter life. Tasks slow as daylight fades. Not because work is finished, but because energy must be preserved. Artificial light is limited. Firelight serves warmth first. Illumination second. You imagine hands finishing one last repair before evening. Tools are placed carefully. Food is covered. The shelter transitions gently toward rest. Women settle closer to bedding areas. Still working, but at a slower pace. Conversation softens. Movements become smaller. You feel how this gradual slowing prepares the body for sleep. There is no abrupt stop. Activity fades naturally. Some researchers note that winter work underground may have strengthened social bonds by keeping people in close contact for extended periods. Cooperation was not optional. It was continuous. You observe how disagreements, when they arise, dissolve quickly. Space does not allow tension to linger. Calm is restored through shared necessity. You think about how different this feels from modern separation of work and rest. Here, they blend. Rest happens between tasks. Work happens gently around rest. The shelter does not divide time into strict categories. It allows flow. You lean back and feel the warmth near the wall. The earth continues to release stored heat. Firelight flickers low. The day nears its quiet end. You sense how the work done here is invisible from the outside. No one passing above would know the care unfolding below. Survival happens quietly, without display. You feel a deep respect for this unseen labor. It sustains life not through force, but through consistency. As evening settles, the shelter holds its balance. Food prepared, bedding adjusted, fire managed, air cleaned. The work of winter continues without urgency or strain. You rest with that awareness, knowing that each small task completed today will make the night gentler. And as darkness deepens above, the shelter remains steady below, shaped by hands that understand patience better than speed. As evening approaches, you feel the moment when the outside world releases those who have been working in the cold. The shelter senses it before you do. The air shifts slightly. The fire waits to be fed. The entrance becomes a threshold of return rather than departure. You hear movement first. Footsteps muffled by snow. Breath drawn sharp by wind. The sound reaches you softened and delayed, giving you time to prepare. Someone is coming back from the cold. The entrance opens briefly. A rush of pale air spills inside. Heavy and slow. It does not travel far. It gathers near the opening. Obedient to the design you shaped earlier, a figure ducks and crawls in, shoulders brushing earth, movements careful and practiced. You watch how the cold peels away in stages. Snow falls from clothing near the threshold. Breath clouds once, twice, then fades. The body pauses, letting warmth reclaim it before moving deeper inside. This ritual repeats every evening. It is never rushed. Returning too quickly drags winter with you. You notice how the men who return from outside do not speak right away. They listen first. They feel the shelter settle back into balance. Only then do words come. Quiet and few. Evidence from winter dwellings suggests that this transition period mattered greatly. Sudden shifts in temperature strain the body. Allowing warmth to return gradually prevents shock and fatigue. You feel the relief spread through the space as another body adds its heat. The shelter warms almost imperceptibly. Firelight reflects off tired faces. Muscles relax. Someone reaches toward the hearth and adds a small piece of fuel. Not much, just enough to support what is already there. Fire responds gently. You observe how outer layers are loosened or removed. Damp clothing is placed near the fire but not too close. Steam rises briefly, then fades. Moisture leaves fabric rather than skin. This practice appears often in descriptions of winter survival. Managing dampness is as important as managing cold. Wet clothing drains heat relentlessly. You notice how returning workers stretch slowly. Joints stiffen quickly in winter. Gentle movement restores circulation. No one forces it. The shelter provides time. There is clear agreement that winter work outside was limited to necessity. Fuel gathering, checking traps, brief hunts. Exposure was minimized. The shelter made this strategy possible by reducing the need for constant movement. You imagine the outside world now. Snow deepening, light fading, wind sharpening. Each return feels earned. Conversation begins softly. Short exchanges. Observations shared without embellishment. Where snow drifted. Where tracks crossed. What the weather promises next. These details matter. They guide decisions for tomorrow. Knowledge gathered outside feeds planning inside. You sit close and listen. The rhythm of speech is slow. No one competes for attention. The shelter dampens urgency. There is some debate about how leadership functioned in such moments. Some suggest elders guided decisions. Others point to situational leadership, where the person who went out spoke with authority on conditions. Both patterns likely existed. You feel how respect moves naturally here. It does not require titles. Experience speaks for itself. Someone hands over a small bundle of gathered fuel. It is inspected, then stored carefully. Supplies are counted silently. Nothing is assumed. Winter demands accounting. You sense how trust builds through these exchanges. Everyone knows what effort costs. No one wastes what someone else carried through cold and snow. The returning bodies settle into the shelter fully now. Warmth stabilizes. Air remains clean. The entrance is closed again. Outside feels distant. You notice how the shelter absorbs the energy of arrival. The space grows fuller, warmer, but not chaotic. It holds. Some researchers note that this daily return reinforced the sense of home more strongly than any structure could. Leaving into danger and returning to safety shapes attachment powerfully. You feel that attachment now. The shelter is not just where you sleep. It is where you recover. Food is passed quietly. A small portion. Enough to restore energy without burdening digestion. Eating after cold exposure feels grounding. You watch faces soften as warmth spreads from within. Hands relax. Shoulders drop. The fire crackles briefly, then settles again. It does not need to roar. Bodies have joined its work. You listen as someone describes a moment outside. A sudden gust. A hidden patch of ice. A glimpse of movement at the edge of vision. The story is brief. No drama. Facts suffice. The shelter receives these stories and holds them without amplifying fear. Experience becomes information rather than anxiety. You think about how different this feels from exposure alone. Alone. The cold presses thoughts inward. Sharp and urgent. Together, those thoughts disperse. There is still uncertainty among scholars about how winter isolation shaped emotional life. Some believe close quarters intensified bonds. Others suggest tension increased. Evidence points to both, depending on circumstance. You feel tonight leaning toward ease. The day's work is done. The shelter has done its part. The returning men settle near the warmer areas, not claiming space, simply fitting into it. Children shift slightly, drawn toward the added warmth without waking fully. You notice how sleep returns quickly to those already resting. Familiar voices and movements do not disturb them. The shelter feels predictable. You close your eyes briefly and sense the collective exhale. Everyone is inside. Everyone is accounted for. The outside world can do what it will now. The shelter has gathered its people. As the evening deepens, the fire dims further. Embers glow steadily. The walls release their stored warmth. The air remains still. You feel the satisfaction of survival not as triumph, but as continuation. Tomorrow will come. Tasks will resume. Cold will persist. But tonight, the shelter holds all who belong to it. And that is enough. Night settles fully now. And with it comes the understanding that this shelter was never meant to last forever. It was built with intention, not permanence. That thought does not bring discomfort. It brings clarity. You sit quietly and feel how the space changes when darkness completes its work. Firelight becomes the primary source of illumination. Shadows soften rather than sharpen. The shelter feels smaller, but also more complete. This place was always meant to serve a season. Across many regions, Underground winter shelters were designed to be temporary solutions shaped by immediate need and long experience. They were not monuments. They were responses. When winter loosened its grip, these spaces were left behind without regret. You imagine the spring thaw. Snow recedes. Ground softens. The shelter, once so vital, becomes unnecessary. People move back into lighter dwellings. Life lifts upward again. Material traces support this pattern. Many winter shelters show signs of careful abandonment rather than collapse. Fires extinguished cleanly. Tools removed. Openings left uncovered. The earth was allowed to reclaim what it had held. You think about the contrast with structures meant to endure. Those require constant defense against decay. These do not. Their strength lies in accepting impermanence. You lean back and rest your head against the wall. The earth presses gently, as if aware that this arrangement will not last. That awareness does not weaken the shelter. It defines it. Some interpretations suggest that the temporary nature of winter shelters reduced the psychological burden of maintenance. There was no expectation of legacy, only function. When function ended, so did obligation. You feel how freeing that is. Living underground during winter required effort, but not endless repair. Walls were smoothed, roofs maintained, fire managed. But no one expected the shelter to survive years of neglect. It existed within a cycle. This acceptance shaped behavior. People cared for the space without clinging to it. Respect did not require permanence. You imagine returning to this site after spring. The roof has sagged slightly. Earth has softened edges. Snowmelt has blurred lines. The shelter is already becoming landscape again. No loss is felt. The work it did is complete. There is discussion among scholars about whether some winter shelters were reused year after year. Evidence suggests both possibilities. Some locations were returned to repeatedly. Others were used once and released. Conditions likely dictated choice. You imagine recognizing a familiar slope next winter, remembering where the ground held firm, digging again, not restoring an old shelter, but creating a new one informed by memory. Knowledge persists even when structures do not. You feel how this approach to building shapes mindset. The goal is not to dominate land, but to adapt to it briefly, to borrow space rather than claim it. This stands in contrast to later traditions that emphasized ownership and permanence. Underground winter shelters reflect a relationship with land that values flexibility. You sit quietly and let the fire burn low. Embers glow softly. The shelter feels complete in this reduced state. Night deepens. Breathing slows around you. Children sleep. Adults rest. The shelter holds everyone equally. You think about how little remains visible from above. Snow covers the roof. Wind passes over. The shelter disappears into the terrain. This invisibility offers safety, but also humility. The land does not bear scars of occupation. It carries memory only briefly. Some researchers suggest that this approach reduced conflict by limiting permanent claims to territory. When structures do not mark land indefinitely, boundaries remain fluid. Movement remains possible. You feel that fluidity now. Even as you rest, you are not fixed. You are waiting. The fire settles into embers fully now. The glow dims. Walls release their stored warmth slowly. The shelter shifts from active protection to passive holding. You draw a hide closer around your shoulders. The movement is small. The effect is immediate. The night is deep. Outside, stars hang unseen above snow clouds. Inside, time stretches gently. You feel no pressure to fill it. The shelter encourages stillness, not forced stillness, earned stillness. You consider how this temporary space has shaped the day. It slowed movement. It narrowed focus. It encouraged cooperation. It softened fear. These effects will linger even after the shelter is gone. You realize now that underground winter living was never about hiding from life. It was about waiting wisely. Waiting for light. Waiting for warmth. Waiting for movement to return. You close your eyes and listen one last time. Fire breath. gentle breathing. Distant wind softened into nothing. The shelter holds, and when winter finally releases its grip, this place will let go without resistance. You rest with that knowledge, comforted by the idea that survival does not require permanence. It requires timing. You begin to notice patterns in the shelter that extend beyond warmth and protection. The space shapes behavior as much as it holds bodies. Every movement, every placement of objects, every breath interacts with the structure to create rhythm. Winter underground is as much choreography as architecture. You shift slightly and feel how the floor responds. Packed earth, layered hides, and mats combine to produce surfaces that guide movement gently. You step carefully to avoid disturbing the balance. Even small gestures have consequences in such an environment. Archaeological evidence consistently shows that pathways inside underground shelters were deliberate. Narrow aisles between bedding and storage areas guided circulation. These channels prevented accidental disturbance of bedding or stored provisions. Movement becomes predictable, efficient, and calm. You pause and notice how this physical arrangement affects interaction. People do not bump into one another. Tasks are completed without crowding. Space teaches coordination naturally. One subtle observation is how sound behaves in these pathways. The shelter muffles footsteps. Voices carry less distance. Each sound becomes measured. Intentional. Noise is not silenced, only controlled. Awareness is required without effort. You look toward the storage corner again. Food remains covered, carefully arranged, and easily accessible. This order is not arbitrary. It ensures survival while minimizing stress. Predictability matters as much as warmth or fuel. A curious pattern appears in the placement of tools and materials. Those used most frequently are closest to work areas. Less essential items reside farther away. This natural hierarchy reduces unnecessary movement and preserves energy during cold months. You observe how bodies adapt to these conditions. People move slowly, deliberately. Gestures are measured. Even speech is restrained, conserving energy and reducing disruption of shared warmth. There is evidence that these patterns influenced social dynamics. Shared space encourages cooperation. Proximity teaches awareness of others. Survival depends on coordination rather than hierarchy alone. Leadership arises from experience and necessity rather than formality. You imagine someone passing through the shelter, tending the fire, adjusting a hide, checking food. Every motion is performed with awareness of others. No one acts in isolation. Some researchers suggest that underground living during winter influenced conflict resolution. Close quarters require diplomacy. Noise and disruption cannot be tolerated. Minor disagreements are resolved quickly to maintain safety and comfort. You notice how the shelter encourages attentiveness to subtle cues. Breath, posture, and sound all communicate information. Eyes adjust to dim light. Hands feel textures. Awareness becomes second nature. A subtle but revealing detail from excavated sites is how sleeping areas were arranged to maximize warmth. People positioned themselves near walls, around fire, or in clusters. Thermal efficiency was achieved without explicit instruction. You sense how much of this learning occurs informally. Observation, imitation, repetition. Children watch adults. Adults watch each other. Patterns emerge naturally over time. Outside, winter continues its work. Wind presses against trees. Snowdrifts form quietly. Light fades and shifts as the day moves slowly toward evening. Inside, the shelter maintains constancy. Temperature remains stable. Sound is muted. Movement is smooth. You feel how the shelter shapes perception. Time seems slower. Energy stretches further. Small tasks gain significance. Unnecessary movements fade. The mind adjusts to patience. One debated aspect among scholars is whether this environment affects perception of risk. Some argue that predictable shelter conditions reduce anxiety. Others suggest that confinement intensifies tension. Both appear in different circumstances and regions. You consider your own awareness of space. Each corner, each wall, each object carries information. Small adjustments produce measurable effects on comfort. You recognize the importance of careful placement, observation, and responsiveness. The fire glows low in the hearth. Embers provide warmth and light without overwhelming. The ceiling absorbs heat gradually and releases it evenly. The air remains calm. The shelter breathes with the rhythm of its inhabitants. You notice the layering of materials around you. Hides, mats, grass, and earth combine into a system that sustains life without demanding constant attention. Each element interacts with others to create stability and warmth. This interplay extends beyond physical properties. The shelter teaches awareness. It encourages cooperation. It imposes a gentle structure on daily life, guiding behavior as surely as walls guide movement. You shift slightly and feel the balance of warmth and space around you. Bodies rest in clusters. Heat spreads naturally. Movement is minimal but effective. Outside, winter remains indifferent. Inside, patterns emerge. Teaching rhythm and patience, survival becomes embedded in behavior rather than imposed externally. You close your eyes and listen to the soft crackle of fire and quiet breathing around you. The shelter absorbs noise, stabilizes temperature, and preserves energy. You realize now how intimately life, space, and survival are intertwined underground. The shelter is more than protection. It is a teacher, a guide, and a living system. And as the night deepens further, you rest, aware that the structure you inhabit has shaped how bodies, minds, and routines flow in perfect harmony. You find yourself reflecting on the contrast between underground living and surface dwellings. Above, winter dominates with wind, snow, and ice. Life is exposed. Each step is calculated. Energy is taxed constantly. Below, within the shelter, everything moves slowly and predictably. You realize how much of survival depends on choosing where to exist, not just how to endure. The walls around you absorb heat gently from the fire and from bodies nearby. Even without direct sunlight, warmth is retained in ways that would be impossible above ground. The earth functions as both barrier and partner, holding temperature steady while providing a consistent boundary. You run your hand along the packed earth. Smooth, cool initially, then gradually transferring warmth from your palm. The surface is alive with memory traces of past seasons, the impressions of bodies that have rested here for generations. These impressions guide movement, showing where to step, where to sit, where to store materials. Evidence from archaeological studies indicates that many underground shelters were reused across winters, and in some cases decades. Layers of soil, ash, and bedding reveal careful maintenance, rather than complete abandonment. Between seasons, people returned not to reclaim space, but to continue the cycle of survival and learning. You observe how the shelter shapes social interaction. Close quarters require cooperation. Tasks are shared naturally. Conversation is measured. Noise is reduced by both design and habit. Movement becomes predictable, minimizing disruptions. These constraints encourage attentiveness to one another, strengthening bonds without explicit instruction. One detail rarely noted is how sleeping arrangements reinforce communal warmth. Children are placed near adults, with layers of bedding between and around them, maximizing thermal efficiency. This arrangement also fosters safety and instruction. Observing adults demonstrates survival techniques naturally. Safety, warmth, and learning all overlap seamlessly. You shift slightly to the side, careful not to disturb the balance of people and heat. Your posture is deliberate, aware of air currents and embers. Even small movements affect temperature distribution. You feel the subtle shift as warmth from another body reaches you, integrating into your own. Energy is conserved collectively, rather than individually. Some anthropologists suggest that this shared space influences emotional resilience. Being close to others while insulated from extreme cold allows stress to dissipate, creating a calm environment conducive to rest, observation, and quiet reflection. Others argue that tensions can emerge in close quarters, but evidence shows that routines, attention to airflow, and shared responsibility mediate conflicts effectively. Food is another aspect that intertwines with social structure. Rations are prepared and shared equitably. Stored provisions are handled with care, rotated to prevent spoilage. Practices evolve subtly over time, informed by observation rather than formal rules. This consistent attention reinforces stability in the shelter, ensuring that all who reside within are sustained. You notice the careful positioning of tasks throughout the day. One person tends the fire while another prepares food. A third mends clothing or bedding. Children observe and sometimes assist, gradually absorbing skills and awareness without instruction. The rhythm of labor mirrors the rhythm of the shelter itself, steady, responsive, predictable. Above, winter rages with occasional bursts of wind and snow. Yet inside, the shelter maintains its equilibrium. Warmth persists. Noise is absorbed. Movement is moderated. Survival has become both a physical and social choreography. You reflect on light. Entryways and smoke holes allow minimal sunlight to penetrate, timed to maximize heat and ventilation. Patterns of movement, placement of fire, and bedding arrangements all respond to these subtle environmental cues. Each choice is practical, yet carries a quiet elegance. The shelter does not impose grandeur, it prioritizes efficiency, safety, and predictability. You shift again, lying partially on your side, feeling the gentle pressure of bodies nearby and the residual warmth of embers below. The air is steady, clean, and breathable. Layers of hides and bedding trap heat without obstructing airflow. Even small adjustments, turning slightly, repositioning an arm, adjusting a hide, affect the distribution of warmth and comfort. The shelter is dynamic, responding to those who inhabit it. Some debate exists about whether these structural and behavioral patterns reflect cultural values or purely practical solutions. Likely both coexist. The design ensures survival while subtly shaping social cohesion, teaching coordination, and transmitting knowledge. Life underground becomes an integrated experience, where architecture, behavior, and environment operate together. You notice that your breathing has slowed. Muscles have relaxed. Even your mind feels quieter, attuned to subtle rhythms rather than external chaos. The shelter holds bodies, temperature, and attention in a delicate balance that fosters rest, observation, and learning. Firelight flickers softly against the walls. Shadows deepen without sharp edges. The ambient heat radiates gently, and you recognize how much of your comfort depends not on the intensity of the flame, but on the cumulative effect of design, material, and awareness. The shelter itself has become a system in which each element, earth, fire, air, and human, supports the others seamlessly. Outside, the storm persists. Yet the sound is softened, distant, almost abstract. Inside, life continues. Patterns repeat. Survival is steady, calm, and deliberate. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to the balance. You close your eyes briefly, absorbing the sense of continuity. Generations of people have lived through similar conditions, moving, resting, observing, and learning within the same rhythms and spaces. Each decision, each adjustment, builds on the ones before, creating a legacy of knowledge embedded in the shelter itself. As you breathe slowly, you understand that the underground winter home is more than protection. It is a teacher, a stabilizer, and a quiet organizer of life. The shelter holds not only bodies but knowledge, social cohesion, and memory. You allow yourself to sink fully into this awareness, resting in the warmth, calm, and security it provides. You take a moment to observe how the shelter manages energy, not just of heat, but of human effort. Movements are minimized naturally. Tasks are prioritized intuitively. Even conversation is measured. This conservation is not taught formally. It is absorbed through repetition and the immediate feedback the shelter provides. You notice how sitting in one place allows warmth to accumulate without additional fuel. Slight shifts of posture redistribute heat from body to body. Hands resting near the fire or against hides amplify the effect. Energy is used efficiently, even unconsciously. Underground living transforms necessity into a subtle art. Evidence from winter shelters across northern regions shows that occupants developed routines aligned with these principles. Activities are sequenced according to proximity to warmth, lighting, and airflow. Children observe adults performing these tasks in rhythm, internalizing habits without instruction. Knowledge transmits naturally through presence and example. You hear the faint sound of wind brushing over the roof, softened by the earth above. It is constant but not threatening. The shelter filters both sound and cold, creating a predictable environment. You sense how this predictability allows the mind to rest while remaining attuned to essential signals. Awareness without anxiety is a survival skill in itself. One subtle but revealing observation is how objects are placed to support energy efficiency. Tools and materials are arranged in order of frequency of use. Food stored for immediate needs sits near the center of activity. Less frequently needed items remain along the walls. Movement flows naturally, minimizing wasted effort and unnecessary exposure to cold. You lean slightly to adjust a bundle of grass under a hide. The action is small, but it affects the distribution of warmth in the area. You feel the difference immediately. Such minor adjustments have a cumulative impact over long winter nights. Energy is preserved. Comfort is maintained. There is broad agreement among researchers that shelters were designed with both physical and social energy in mind. Warmth is conserved, effort is minimized, and interactions are structured to reinforce cooperation. Individual needs are balanced against collective efficiency. Every action is guided by the constraints and affordances of the space. You glance toward the fire. Embers glow steadily, radiating heat that is absorbed by the walls and redistributed. You notice how this energy persists long after active burning has ceased. The shelter acts as a thermal reservoir, reducing the need for constant fuel. This design allows inhabitants to conserve both material and physical energy. Children observe silently as adults adjust bedding, stir embers, and move with care. Their attention is gentle and attentive. Every small action becomes an informal lesson. Movement, posture, and placement are internalized as part of survival. Learning unfolds in tandem with daily routine. You notice that the shelter has a subtle hierarchy of space, proximity to the fire, bedding layers, and airflow patterns all inform the most effective positions for rest and activity. Occupants adapt naturally to these patterns. The structure enforces order without explicit rules. Guidance comes from the environment itself. Some scholars argue that this informal system influenced social behavior and community cohesion. Close quarters encourage cooperation, empathy, and patience. Decisions are made with awareness of others. Survival is distributed collectively rather than shouldered individually. Evidence supports this as a recurring pattern across multiple cultures. You shift slightly, testing how warmth moves across bodies and surfaces. The subtle redistribution is immediate. Every movement has an effect, reinforcing the delicate balance maintained by the shelter's design. Awareness of this interdependence becomes second nature to those living within it. The fire crackles softly. Its heat is steady, enough to sustain comfort without creating excess smoke or drying the air. The glow illuminates textures of packed earth, hides, and grass, revealing the work of countless hands that shaped this space over years. Every surface bears traces of care and use. You consider how time is experienced underground. Without dramatic external cues, the rhythm of tasks, movement, and rest defines the passage of hours. Sleep, activity, and quiet observation become integrated into a continuous flow. The shelter enforces temporal patterns that support survival. A subtle but important observation in ethnographic studies is that the arrangement of space encourages vigilance without tension. Individuals notice minor shifts in temperature, airflow, and sound. Awareness is maintained not through anxiety, but through interaction with the environment. The shelter teaches attentiveness naturally. You stretch slightly, feeling the warmth of the earth beneath and the subtle heat radiating from adjacent bodies. The shelter operates as a single system. Fire, earth, humans, and stored materials interact to create stability. Each component depends on the others. Efficiency is systemic rather than individual. Outside, winter continues its relentless course. But inside, the shelter maintains equilibrium. Predictability allows energy to be conserved and mental focus to sharpen. Comfort is achieved through alignment with the natural rhythms of the space. You lie back, closing your eyes briefly, listening to soft breathing, crackling embers, and distant muted wind. Every element of the shelter works in harmony, shaping behavior, conserving energy, and supporting life in ways that are subtle but profound. As night deepens further, you feel a profound sense of integration. The shelter holds warmth, safety, and routine. It teaches rhythm, cooperation, and awareness without words. Winter is present, but manageable. The earth and its layers of care shape experience continuously, guiding survival through quiet, deliberate design. You begin to notice the subtle rhythm of departure as winter loosens its hold. Leaving the shelter is never sudden. It is a process, marked by careful preparation and awareness. The world outside remains harsh. Even as daylight grows, the cold retains its bite. Survival does not end with winter's passing, and the shelter prepares its inhabitants for transition. You rise slowly, testing your muscles after long hours of minimal movement. Stretching is deliberate. Every joint, every tendon responds to gentle pressure. The shelter has allowed your body to conserve energy and maintain warmth. Movement now is not exhausting. It is methodical and intentional. You check the fire, which has burned low overnight. A few embers remain, holding residual heat. You add a small piece of fuel to bring it back to life, just enough to warm bodies preparing to leave. Flames respond gradually. Smoke rises steadily through the carefully shaped smoke hole. The air remains breathable. Nothing is rushed. The shelter holds. It has done its work. You notice how quiet it has become. Yet the air retains the memory of warmth. The layers of earth, hides, and bedding continue to release heat slowly, ensuring comfort even as people begin the transition outward. You observe others beginning the process. Bodies stretch and shift. Hides and coverings are adjusted. Small tasks are performed in sequence, gathering remaining food, inspecting stored items, checking tools, smoothing bedding to prevent collapse. Each movement follows a rhythm refined through experience. Material evidence from winter shelters indicates that leaving was often as deliberate as entering. Floors were swept. Fire embers were extinguished or buried slightly to prevent accidental ignition. Tools and supplies were secured. Entrances were left accessible but unobstructed. These measures ensured the shelter could serve again if needed. You watch a younger member of the group observe carefully. Hands mimic the motions of adults. Knowledge is passed through participation, not instruction. Every step in leaving the shelter is itself a lesson in survival. Some scholars suggest that the structured routine of departure reduces anxiety and stress associated with leaving a safe environment. Moving from a protective space into uncertainty can be psychologically taxing. The shelter's design and the associated rituals of exit prepare occupants gradually. You check your own preparations. Clothing is layered appropriately. Outer garments are adjusted to prevent exposure to residual cold. Tools are gathered, small items wrapped securely. Movement is measured to preserve warmth while negotiating the transition from earth to open air. You pause briefly at the threshold, the entrance. shaped to moderate airflow, now functions to ease exposure. Cold air collects near the opening. Heavy but restrained, you allow it to brush against your body gradually. This momentary acclimation prevents shock. It is an unnoticed but essential part of survival. Once inside the threshold, you adjust the position of your body to move forward deliberately. Hands support your weight lightly. Feet find stable points. Every motion is calibrated to minimize heat loss and maintain balance. Outside, the landscape is cold but softened by snow. Wind patterns are familiar from daily observation. Snowdrifts show predictable accumulation. The path back to surface dwellings or activity sites has been monitored carefully during previous excursions. These observations inform the timing and manner of departure. Evidence suggests that families coordinated departures carefully. Timing, sequencing, and awareness of environmental conditions were shared knowledge. Success depended on collective attention rather than individual improvisation. You continue moving forward, feeling the difference in temperature and exposure with each step. The warmth retained from the shelter lingers, reducing shock. Energy is conserved. Your body responds predictably, as learned from repeated winters spent in similar conditions. The transition also reinforces social cohesion, coordination, mutual awareness, and subtle communication ensure everyone exits safely. Mistakes in timing or movement could result in discomfort, or worse. For those less prepared, a subtle but revealing practice appears in ethnographic records. People often left the shelter with staggered timing. Those better acclimated or carrying essential supplies moved first. Others followed carefully. Observing both air currents and terrain, this sequence minimized risk and maximized comfort. You notice the sound of snow underfoot is muted. The shelter has preserved your senses. Listening for obstacles or hazards is intuitive. Sight is adjusted to low contrast. Movement is deliberate. Awareness remains heightened without stress. You reach the final steps out of the shelter. The body is accustomed to transition. Breath is steady. Muscles cooperate. The mind remains calm. Winter is present, but no longer oppressive. Emergence into the open air is not abrupt. The shelter's preparation, design, and routines have guided each step. Energy remains conserved. Comfort persists. Despite exposure, the transition is complete, yet unnoticeable in its smoothness. You look back briefly. The entrance sits quietly under the snow. It will remain ready for future use. The earth has absorbed and released warmth, held bodies safely, and supported learning. Its work continues even as you leave. This process teaches more than survival. It imparts patience, coordination, awareness, and trust in both people and environment. The shelter is more than a structure. It is an extension of knowledge and practice, shaping each life that passes through it. And as you continue beyond the threshold, you carry with you lessons embedded in walls, floors, and layers of earth. Winter persists above, yet the shelter's influence remains within, guiding steps, movement, and breath in harmony with the environment. You pause briefly in the open air, allowing your senses to adjust fully after the sheltered stillness. The cold presses against exposed skin, reminding you that even a few steps outside require awareness. The transition from the regulated environment of the shelter to the unpredictability of winter above ground reinforces lessons learned below. Every movement, every breath, every step is informed by prior experience. You notice how the landscape changes with subtle shifts in light and temperature. Snow reflects a pale illumination, diffusing shadows and softening edges. Wind patterns remain familiar from previous observations, yet new gusts remind you of the environment's constant variability. This is the challenge of winter-life balance between predictability and adaptation. There is broad agreement among researchers that knowledge of the surrounding terrain was as vital as shelter design itself. Trails, windbreaks, and resource locations were memorized. Returning from excursions depended on integrating these spatial cues with awareness of conditions. Underground shelters facilitated this learning by offering a controlled starting point for observation and preparation. You check your own movements. Every step distributes energy efficiently. Your feet sink slightly into soft snow, absorbing impact and reducing fatigue. You pause to adjust a garment, maintaining warmth without creating unnecessary bulk. These small actions compound over time, conserving energy and supporting endurance. You recognize that mastery of such minute adjustments is crucial in winter survival. Children move carefully alongside adults. Their observation skills, sharpened over weeks or months underground, allow them to anticipate patterns. Watching older individuals navigate snow and wind teaches timing, body positioning, and pacing without explicit instruction. These lessons are essential for life outside the shelter, forming a bridge between learned habits and environmental demands. A subtle detail from ethnographic studies highlights the coordination required during transitions between shelter and surface. Adults often monitor both the terrain and each participant's condition, adjusting pace to accommodate fatigue, clothing adequacy, and alertness. This form of tacit leadership maintains safety while reinforcing social cohesion. Every individual is both observer and observed, contributing to collective awareness. You glance back at the shelter. Snow accumulates softly on its roof, muffling its presence. The earth has reclaimed the surface partially, but the structure remains intact, ready for use again. Its impermanence is not a limitation. It is a feature, allowing future generations to replicate knowledge without burdening them with permanence. The shelter exists to serve a season, to mediate risk, and to transmit understanding through practice. You focus now on stored provisions carried from the shelter. Each bundle is positioned strategically, balancing accessibility with the need to protect against cold. Items required immediately are nearer the body, while less urgent supplies remain secured. These arrangements reflect accumulated knowledge about energy efficiency and risk management. They demonstrate foresight that integrates both practical and social considerations. You notice how wind interacts with these items. Careful positioning minimizes exposure. Lightweight covers stabilize contents without sealing them completely, allowing ventilation that prevents condensation. Each decision, though minor in isolation, cumulatively protects resources essential for survival. The rhythm of departure continues. Individuals adjust clothing layers as movement accelerates. Hands tuck mittens, scarves, or hoods into place. Balance is maintained even under shifting snow. The body moves intuitively, guided by experience developed underground. Patterns of movement are repeated from prior excursions, reinforcing muscle memory and awareness. There is some scholarly discussion about whether these practices were formalized or entirely emergent. Evidence suggests that routine, repetition, and observation transmit knowledge effectively without codified instruction. Survival skills, including careful movement, layering, and pacing, are learned collectively, embedded within daily patterns of activity. You note the impact of exposure on physiology. Body temperature decreases gradually, avoiding sudden shock. Breathing is controlled, timed with movement to optimize oxygen intake without excessive cooling. Energy is allocated according to necessity, conserving reserves for extended activity. The shelter's previous lessons inform these adjustments. Children and younger adults observe the flow of movement attentively. They mimic posture, timing, and sequencing. Through participation, they internalize environmental cues, learning to integrate shelter knowledge with surface conditions. This experiential learning reinforces the symbiotic relationship between structure, routine, and environmental adaptation. You continue forward, mindful of footing and distance. Each step is intentional. Momentum is moderated to maintain warmth and energy. Snow shifts underfoot, but prior knowledge of terrain guides placement. Small decisions compound to maintain overall stability and safety. The shelter behind you serves as both reference and refuge. Its design, careful use of space, and accumulated knowledge allow safe interaction with the challenging environment. It has functioned as a mediator between human vulnerability and environmental harshness, transmitting lessons through repeated engagement. You pause again to observe the landscape. Patterns of snow, wind, and light provide immediate feedback. Recognition of these patterns ensures safe navigation. The environment is demanding, but familiarity cultivated underground informs response strategies. Every choice is grounded in both instinct and learned practice. You inhale deeply, allowing cold air to reach your lungs fully while maintaining controlled exhalation to minimize heat loss. You feel alert and prepared. Your body integrates prior lessons seamlessly, adapting to surface demands without conscious effort. This fluency is a testament to the efficacy of the shelter and the practices it enforces. Emergence into winter above ground reinforces understanding. You are not merely surviving, you are executing knowledge shaped by experience, structured routine, and environmental feedback. The shelter continues to teach, even indirectly, through patterns learned and internalized. You pause one final time to appreciate the shelter's role, not as permanent architecture, but as a dynamic space that guides behavior, mediates risk, and fosters learning. It holds bodies, knowledge, and rhythm, preparing individuals for movement, observation, and endurance outside. Its influence persists long after departure. You feel the weight of winter pressing lightly against the landscape, yet the shelter behind you has prepared you to move through it with measured care. Each step is informed by habits cultivated underground. Energy is conserved. Awareness is heightened. Survival has become a rhythm rather than a struggle. You notice how snow reflects the weak winter light, diffusing shadows and reducing visual contrast. This soft illumination is deceptive. Surfaces may appear uniform, while subtle ridges and ice remain hidden. You adjust your stride, placing feet deliberately to maintain stability. Knowledge from prior excursions, combined with instincts reinforced underground, guides each motion. Your body adapts without conscious calculation. Materials carried from the shelter are positioned for immediate accessibility. Dried food, fire-starting materials, and small tools are arranged carefully. Decisions about placement are guided by prior lessons, accessibility, protection from wind, and thermal retention. You adjust a bundle slightly, feeling how minor shifts affect balance and movement. Even small actions preserve energy over extended exposure. Children follow quietly, learning by observation. They watch adults coordinate movement, distribute weight, and maintain posture. Every adjustment teaches principles of energy conservation, spatial awareness, and environmental adaptation. Knowledge is embedded in routine, passed down through embodied practice rather than verbal instruction. Each repetition reinforces learning. You pause to assess the wind. Its direction, strength, and consistency are all familiar from repeated monitoring. Shifts in snow patterns, the gentle bending of tree branches, and faint echoes from distant terrain all provide information. This is winter literacy, a comprehension of the environment developed through attentive engagement, taught subtly through repeated experience within the shelter and through guided excursions. Some scholars note that this kind of knowledge transmission relies less on explicit teaching and more on immersive participation, observation, imitation, and responsive action replace formal instruction. Children internalize patterns and sequences, learning to anticipate and respond appropriately. The shelter's design facilitates this learning by providing predictable starting conditions and reinforcing safe behaviors. You step carefully over a patch of snow that has accumulated unevenly. Beneath it, ice has formed, hidden yet perceptible to practiced feet. The body instinctively adjusts to subtle cues: texture underfoot, temperature variation, the weight of each step. These responses are refined through countless hours spent moving in and out of underground spaces and across the surrounding terrain. You glance back at the shelter. Its presence is quiet but profound. Snow has accumulated on the roof, softening its outline and muting sound. The earth has absorbed and released warmth, stabilized the internal atmosphere, and taught its inhabitants through patterns of engagement. Its design continues to influence behavior even after you have left. Above, winter's elements continue their steady work. Snow shifts and drifts. Wind pressures adjust. Light fluctuates. You navigate this environment with measured awareness, conserving energy while maintaining stability. Every decision, from footing to clothing adjustment, reflects accumulated knowledge reinforced within the shelter. You adjust layers of clothing to balance insulation and breathability. Heat retention is crucial, but overheating can lead to moisture buildup and loss of comfort. Each adjustment is deliberate, informed by past experience. The subtle interaction between body, clothing, and environment becomes intuitive through repeated practice underground. Movement is shared. Those accompanying you follow similar rhythms. Coordination is achieved not through explicit commands but through observation and subtle cues. Proximity, pace, and posture are all synchronized. The social structure embedded in shelter routines extends seamlessly into surface activity, maintaining safety and efficiency. You notice how sensory perception adapts. Hearing is calibrated to detect subtle shifts in snow or wind. Sight is adjusted to discern texture and depth despite diffuse light. Touch provides feedback on surface stability. The body and mind operate as an integrated system, shaped by the combined experience of shelter and environment. Small rituals persist. The fire left inside the shelter is monitored remotely, ensuring it does not reignite hazards while remaining a potential source of warmth for returning excursions. Stored provisions are checked periodically for moisture or displacement. These routines maintain equilibrium without creating urgency or stress. The landscape unfolds as a series of micro-environments: snowdrifts, icy patches, and slight inclines inform movement and timing. Knowledge acquired underground is applied continuously. Each step is informed by observation, memory, and instinct. You pause to adjust the balance of a carried bundle. Its weight distribution affects both stability and energy expenditure. Such small considerations, repeated over hours and days, make the difference between comfort and exhaustion. The shelter has taught attentiveness to these nuances through controlled experience. Children move alongside, practicing observation and adjustment. They learn not through instruction alone but through repetition, seeing adults respond to environmental cues, feeling terrain and snow underfoot, and gradually internalizing patterns for energy management. Safety and efficiency. The shelter has instilled habits that extend into surface survival. As daylight diminishes and winter shadows lengthen, the knowledge embedded in the shelter continues to influence action. Movement remains deliberate, energy conserved, awareness heightened. The interplay between environment, structure, and human behavior is seamless. You breathe slowly, feeling the cumulative effects of shelter, warmth, and careful movement. Energy is preserved. Awareness is integrated. Survival is maintained not by force, but by alignment with the rhythms and lessons of the environment. Every element, the earth, fire, bodies, and routines interacts to create stability. And as you continue through the cold landscape, you recognize the shelter's influence persists. Its design, routines, and accumulated knowledge guide not only your physical actions but also your perception, decision-making, and attention. Winter remains present, but its challenges are manageable because of the preparation, observation, and rhythms instilled underground. Night deepens, and with it comes a final period of quiet reflection. The day above ground has been navigated carefully. Lessons reinforced. Energy conserved. Now, as you prepare to return to the shelter, or perhaps settle into rest elsewhere, you recognize how the space, routines, and accumulated knowledge have shaped survival. You pause to observe the patterns of snow and wind, noting how drifts form against natural barriers, how open spaces amplify exposure. Each observation builds on prior experience underground. The shelter has trained you to notice these subtleties, to integrate environmental cues with physical movement and social coordination. This awareness reduces risk and preserves energy. Returning indoors, if you choose, is a ritual in itself. Every step mirrors prior practice, crouching through entrances, adjusting posture to control airflow, managing layers of clothing to retain warmth. The shelter has prepared you to transition with minimal loss of heat and minimal exposure to cold air. Each movement is deliberate, almost choreographed, informed by habit, observation, and understanding of natural forces. Inside the shelter, the space remains steady. Embers glow softly, retaining warmth from prior use. The air is calm, filtered by packed earth, hides, and bedding. The shelter itself mediates energy, smoothing extremes of temperature and insulating bodies against the harsh environment outside. Walls and floor absorb residual heat, radiating it gently to maintain comfort. The quiet is profound. Noise and wind from above are filtered, leaving only the subtle rhythm of fire, breathing, and small movements. You notice how movement within the shelter remains deliberate. Pathways between bedding, storage, and fire are well established. Each step maintains balance and minimizes disruption to thermal and social equilibrium. Occupants adjust intuitively, coordinating movement with others without verbal instruction. Awareness extends beyond personal needs to encompass the comfort and safety of all within the space. Stored provisions are checked and organized. Bundles of dried meat, roots, and fire materials are arranged according to frequency of use. Proximity to activity zones, and thermal considerations. This system ensures minimal energy expenditure when accessing resources while protecting them from moisture or temperature fluctuations. Children observe adults performing these tasks, internalizing procedures without formal teaching, learning how survival depends on careful attention to detail. You shift slightly, adjusting a hide beneath your body. The layering of grass, bark, and hides distributes pressure and retains heat efficiently. Small adjustments in posture or material placement subtly influence warmth distribution. This responsiveness exemplifies the shelter's integration of design and behavior. The space is alive in function, responsive to movement, and instructive in practice. Fire is tended gently. A small piece of fuel added maintains embers without producing excess smoke. The glow warms nearby bodies and energizes the packed earth, which slowly radiates heat throughout the shelter. Air remains clean and breathable. The fire, bedding, and walls interact as a system, stabilizing temperature, distributing warmth, and teaching inhabitants the subtle dynamics of energy management. Children settle into clusters near adults, absorbing warmth and security. Their presence reinforces thermal efficiency, and their observation reinforces learning. The shelter functions as an immersive classroom, transmitting knowledge about movement, coordination, and environmental awareness through practice rather than explanation. Skills acquired in these conditions translate directly to survival outside. You lean back, closing your eyes briefly, and feel the cumulative effects of shelter, movement, and energy management. Muscles relax, breathing slows, awareness sharpens subtly, attuned to the soft rhythms of the fire, air, and nearby bodies. The shelter has mediated experience throughout the day, shaping both body and mind to operate in harmony with environment and community. There is subtle acknowledgement that this space is temporary. Its impermanence is integral to its function. Materials and construction allow it to be built, used, maintained, and released without expectation of permanence. The shelter teaches adaptability, reinforcing that survival depends on flexibility, observation, and careful alignment with natural forces rather than permanent structures. You sense the cycles embedded in this space. Night follows day. Winter continues its course. The shelter supports survival in rhythm with environmental changes. Activities flow into rest. Observation flows into action. And learning continues through repetition and participation. The shelter becomes more than a refuge. It is a teacher, a stabilizer, and a repository of knowledge embedded in its design and daily routines. You breathe slowly, absorbing the quiet, warmth, and stability. The shelter holds bodies, resources, and attention, reinforcing awareness, cooperation, and survival strategies. Every movement, every adjustment, every observation contributes to equilibrium. The experience has been cumulative, extending from the earth beneath your hands to the cold landscape outside, and from the warmth of fire to the attentive rhythm of human activity within. As the night progresses, the shelter's influence consolidates. Individuals rest, embers glow steadily, air remains stable, energy is conserved, learning continues, often unconsciously, through the cycles of movement, care, and observation. The shelter, in its quiet presence, ensures that those who inhabit it are prepared for the ongoing demands of winter. And as the final hours of this day unfold, you understand that survival is not solely a function of warmth, food, or protection. It is a product of alignment with the earth, with environmental rhythms, with social patterns, and with practices refined over generations. The shelter is not merely a space. It is a system of knowledge, behavior, and support. You close your eyes fully now, letting the accumulated warmth, rhythm, and guidance settle around you. Winter remains outside, vast and indifferent. Yet inside, the shelter has held, guided, and preserved. Knowledge, practice, and observation converge in comfort and security. Tonight, it has done its work. The fire dims into gentle embers, sending warmth into the packed walls and floor. Outside, winter whispers softly, snow shifting with subtle pressure, wind tracing invisible lines across the landscape. Inside, bodies rest in clusters, quiet and steady. The air carries the faint scent of smoke, hides, and dried provisions, a combination that feels grounding, familiar, and safe. You feel yourself slowing, letting the rhythm of the shelter and the collective breathing of its occupants guide your mind toward rest. Every movement, every adjustment, every breath has been carefully mediated throughout the day, training your awareness and conserving energy, guiding you toward calm. You notice how the shelter seems alive, responding gently to shifts in position, heat, and attention. Walls absorb warmth, fire radiates steady energy, and your body aligns naturally with these subtle flows. The presence of others adds depth to the warmth, both physical and emotional. Even children, small and observing, reinforce the sense of security and continuity. Patterns of movement, care, and observation converge in this enclosed space, creating a gentle harmony that feels protective and enduring. Outside, winter remains vast and indifferent, yet you are cushioned from its harshness. The shelter has done more than preserve life, it has shaped perception, imparted knowledge, and nurtured cooperation. Each breath you take is absorbed into the rhythm, each heartbeat aligning with the quiet pulse of the space. The accumulated lessons of movement, energy, and observation settle softly into your mind. You feel safe, steady, and held, ready to drift into rest. With eyes closed, your body and mind relax fully. Comfort flows gradually, warmth lingers, and attention softens. Tonight, the shelter holds you completely, protecting, guiding, and steadying you as winter continues beyond the walls. Sweet dreams.